I skipped the family cruise. After being asked to buy my own ticket, now they're upset they can't reach me. For the holidays, my folks wanted to take a cruise. My brother, 28M, his girlfriend, 26F, my boyfriend, 27M, and I, 25F, were invited. The golden child has always been my brother, who we'll call James. Some background. When James was caught selling pills in high school, it was written off as just a phase. In the meantime, my parents threatened to expel me after I was found smoking marijuana. Despite dropping out of college 3 times and losing his scholarship, James is still seen as ideal. I was told I didn't put in enough effort when I graduated a semester late. I dwell in my home state, close to my parents, while James continues to reside in the place where he went to college. He doesn't go to school or work. My parents often purchase tickets for him to travel to see them, but they won't purchase a ticket for me to travel to see him or anywhere else. He recently purchased a $2,000 dog with the money they provide him for rent and other expenses. My parents promptly removed me from their insurance when I was 22 and got my first big job since I could receive benefits. James, meanwhile, continued to be covered by their insurance until his 26th birthday. I returned to living with my parents in order to save money after being laid off last year. My parents, who had never talked about it previously, insisted that I pay $10,000 in back rent when I started a new job. I recently moved in with my boyfriend after paying it off in the end. I've always had this pattern in my life. James gets everything while I have to put in a lot of effort. Let's go on the cruise now. My parents ordered tickets for James, his fiancée, and themselves after announcing their plans. They advised me to purchase my own ticket because I work at a well-paying job. Being the only one forced to purchase my own ticket infuriated me, so I told them it wasn't fair. Due to holiday arrangements with his family, my partner was unable to attend. My parents said, "Green doesn't look good on you," and accused me of being pampered. It's a phrase I'm so sick of hearing. It's not like you need a nice room because we'll be outside most of the time anyway, they continued. Perhaps that is the case, then why did James receive a good room? I informed them I was leaving because I had had enough. I may be the jerk here, though, because I gave them the impression that I was still going for months. They instructed me to arrive at their house by 8 a.m., the night before they were scheduled to depart so that we could begin the drive to the port at 8:30. They began messaging me the following morning, inquiring about my whereabouts. I responded to your SMS by saying, "I'll be at my boyfriend's Thanksgiving instead, since you didn't want to make the effort to have me join you. Enjoy your vacation with your beloved youngster." I then turned off the chat. I discussed this with a few friends. Some people thought it was rude to abruptly cancel, while others felt I should have accepted the situation and gone anyway, since I would have likely enjoyed myself once I was there. Now that they've been on the cruise for a few days, I'm beginning to feel bad about the way I handled things. It's not like I couldn't afford the ticket, so I'm sure I would have enjoyed myself. Additionally, I could have communicated my point more effectively. However, I'm also rather tired of their treating me in this manner. Is it my fault for calling off our family's vacation? Update 1. Of course, I'll start by paying the $10,000 in overdue rent. I didn't think the number was the problem. It's obviously a little higher than I would have preferred, but not unreasonably so given how long I stayed there. It's not as though I could have gotten a better deal on renting my own house. I would have spent all of my cash and most likely accrued debt while I was unemployed if I hadn't moved in with them. I worked as a server and did some freelance writing while I was searching for a new career in my profession, so I was helping to pay for groceries but not electricity or rent. As a result, when I found work again, I could see why my parents needed financial assistance. I only wish that expectation had been clearer from the start rather than being thrown at me as a surprise. I understood that having me stay for so long, especially while they were renovating their house, was inconvenient for them, so I paid for it. Pushing back didn't seem worthwhile. It just felt easier to pay the money, and I know that if I had refused, it would have become a major problem. Yes, it's likely that I need to work on my pushover tendencies. Fortunately, I work as a technical writer, which pays well, so after I started my new job, I was able to save money for a move out and pay my parents back in approximately 6 months. For those who are interested in the chronology, in January of last year, I lost my job. I moved in with my parents after using my money to cover my rent until my lease expired in June. From June of last year until September of this year, when I moved in with my partner, I lived with them. My parents informed me that they wanted back rent and future rent till I moved out when I started my present job in May. They claimed it was to encourage me to stand again. Technically, not all of it was back rent, but I used the term to be succinct. The entire sum came to $10,000 by the time I moved out, and I had already settled the majority of it. A few responses mentioned taking my parents to court, But I don't think that's worth it or even feasible. I didn't protest paying it, and we never had a formal contract. That wasn't something I wanted them to remember. Any legal matter would only rehash everything, and I would prefer not to do that. At least it's done now that it's paid. I'm aware that I should probably resist their demands more in the future. Since everything has been like way my entire life, it's just challenging. I've learned from my experiences that if I refuse, they would perceive me as unappreciative. I strive for perfection because all I want is for them to care for and support me in the same way that they do James. The worst thing is that I was quite close to James as a child. We spent a lot of time together as children. I was taught how to ride a bike by him. When I was being bullied, he defended me. He just never learned how to be independent, and I don't think that makes him a horrible person at all. He doesn't understand why I have problems with our parents, which has caused tension in our relationship. I miss playing RuneScape with my brother late at night. Since he has consistently received additional assistance, I'm rather certain he fully accepts the notion that he needs it. He has no idea what else to do or anticipate. He still treats me nicely, at least, but he doesn't recognize the difference in our treatment. In essence, he wants me to accept it and become a member of the family. Unfortunately, once it came to problems with our parents, all of his support simply vanished. One day, I hope, James will gain some distance from them so we can get back in touch. I do not wish for our relationship to continue to suffer as a result of this. I apologize for being so sentimental, but let's get back to the comments. I also saw that some people wanted to know why I hadn't informed them sooner that I was canceling. They would have spent those months attempting to get me to go and humiliating me if I persisted in refusing, but I see that was a petty move on my behalf. It looked like a lot of work, and my method was much simpler. I did receive some joy from it, albeit perhaps this is embarrassing of me. Treating them the same way they treat me was satisfying. Furthermore, it didn't really affect their trip. They traveled nonetheless, only without me. The idea of having little to no contact with my family was mentioned in a lot of the comments, and I've been thinking about it ever since. My boyfriend, who has witnessed my parents' behavior firsthand, supports this choice. If I tell my pals the whole tale, I'm sure they'll be on board as well. I've tried to avoid discussing the family dynamic with my friends since I find it depressing, and most of them have never met my parents. Additionally, I didn't want to come across as constantly complaining. They had only heard a few minor grievances here and there before. Having said that, the following is what has transpired since my last post. Late on Wednesday night, my boyfriend and I arrived at the cottage. His mother adored the bouquet I sent her, which included her favorite flowers. Before going to bed, we chatted with his family and had a small glass of wine. They didn't seem to mind that I wasn't as jovial as usual because I was still a little unsure about my choices. I promised myself that evening that I would ignore my personal family problems and concentrate solely on enjoying the trip with my boyfriend's family, who have always been so kind to me. We got up early on Thursday and assisted his mother in preparing various meals and arranging the table. After that, I played cornhole with his cousins, but we lost because I'm not that athletic. The actual Thanksgiving lunch was excellent. His mother cooks really well. I felt much better about choosing to spend the holidays with them because everyone was so kind to me and made me feel like a member of the family. His mother even told me at the conclusion of the evening that she hopes I will be able to live with the family someday, even though she knows it is ultimately up to my partner. We hugged after I assured her that I would be honored if that occurred. I sincerely hope it will. I want to be with my partner for the rest of my life since I love him so much. His family is an amazing benefit as well. Throughout Thanksgiving and the remainder of the weekend, I had a great time. We watched movies, played board games, hung out by the bonfire, and went on some amazing hikes. My partner also took care of his young nephew for a while. I definitely got a little baby fever from watching them play with Legos together, but I don't want to act on it for at least a few years. I've already missed everything since we returned yesterday afternoon. There was no family drama, which made my own family appear even more dysfunctional, and it was truly a blast. I feel like I'm babbling a little bit now. In all honesty, I probably have been, but I'm just so happy to convey how much fun I had during the holiday and how I made the correct choice. Regretfully, there are some negative aspects to this upgrade. I hope it is. Last night, my parents contacted me to express their continued dissatisfaction with my decision. I suppose they weren't sufficiently relaxed by the sea air and free beverages. Sad that you chose not to be with your family in such beautiful places, my dad wrote in a passive-aggressive text message that included cruise photos. It seems like you guys had a good time, I answered, sending back a photo from my trip with my boyfriend's family. We did too. My mother then called to express her sadness that I had spoiled their memories and missed out on a wonderful family holiday because of a small grievance against my brother. I informed her that their unjust preferential treatment of us was my problem, not James's. Since James needs help while he figures out his direction in life, and I've always been considerably more independent, my mother felt that I was being unjust by drawing comparisons between our circumstances. They never really let me rely on them, so that's the only reason that's true, I informed her. She stated that I should either grow up and be thankful for everything they have done or leave them alone for good and shatter their hearts all at once rather than piece by piece. She also said she would not apologize for raising a self-sufficient daughter. Even though they appeared to be doing just well without me based on the pictures my dad provided and what they shared on social media, she accused me of being heartless for dangling the hope of a wonderful holiday only to snatch it away at the last second. By this time, I was furious and gave her several examples of how they put James first in the hopes that she would finally realize how this upbringing has impacted me. Considering that I am childless and have never had to make difficult choices, my mother thought I had a lot of nerve to scrutinize their parenting. I guess I'll just leave you guys alone like you want since I'll never be enough for this family anyway, I remarked, tired of the conversation. As usual, my boyfriend provided me with a lot of support even though I ended the call crying. To lift my spirits, we watched The Hunger Games and ate ice cream for the remainder of the evening. I adore the series and can't wait for the new film to be out. After everything, it seemed weird to return to work today and pretend nothing had happened. However, I believe it served as a useful diversion as well. With the exception of last night's events, I actually returned from my vacation feeling more rested than I probably would have after the cruise because I had chosen my boyfriend's plans rather than my family's. Although my parents haven't responded to me yet, I suspect they're bluffing. They'll definitely get in touch if they need something, or they'll likely attempt to make things work out before Christmas, so they won't have to tell our wider family about it. I'm still not sure if I'll be amenable to making amends. Despite the fact that I have done so much for them, I know I deserve better than to be viewed as an afterthought and a burden. I'm fed up with trying to meet their standards, and I don't think their behavior will ever change. However, it's so hard to completely leave them because they are my family. All I want is to experience the same level of acceptance and affection from my own family as I do from my boyfriend's. Why do they find it so difficult to treat me as though I'm important? Additionally, I'm afraid that if I don't be kind to them, they'll fabricate a tale to blame me, and my extended family will also be upset with me. Although my parents have a significant impact on everyone's viewpoints, there are some members of my family who I like. I'm not sure if it would be better to accept the loss and move on from a dynamic where I'm obviously not valued, or if it would be worth putting up with them in order to maintain some ties to my family. At the very least, I want to keep my brother, but perhaps I'm clinging to the past, and that James is no longer there. I hope that isn't the case. My parents have brainwashed him into believing they are infallible, so I'm not sure how to approach him. I doubt that I will ever be able to fully regain my brother. Right now, I have a lot on my mind, and I'm not sure if I'm prepared to make such a significant life change. I do think that if I at least kept my distance from them, or perhaps stopped talking to them completely, I would feel a lot lighter and more liberated. Now to the next story, Story 2. My biological mother organized my birthday celebration around her stepdaughter's favorite pastimes, and I laughed in her face. When I was 6 years old, my parents divorced and went their own ways. They both started new families, although they obviously shared custody of me. My mother married a man, let's call him Robert, when I was 9 years old. He already had a daughter, Kira, who was 2 years my senior. When I was 8 years old, my dad proposed to Lila, a lovely woman, and they were married when I was 12. Lila and I have a lovely friendship. For me, she has been a real mother. She essentially assisted my dad in raising me, showed interest in my life, offered consolation, counseled me, and we had things in common. Together, we engaged in a variety of activities. She and I just discussed the prospect of her legally adopting me when I reach adulthood. Since my parents share custody, doing so today might be a little complicated legally, but I want it to be formal because she is my real mother. In contrast, I have virtually little relationship with my biological mother. I was made to spend some days with her, but we were never able to connect. Since Kira already had her own mother, she devoted all of her time to showing her love and care. Kira was always involved in activities, even when my mom tried to include me, and we only did things that she enjoyed. I eventually began turning down her invites and frequently asked if I might skip seeing her on the designated days. I preferred to stay at home with my father and Lila because I was nearly always disregarded or left out. Although he had to follow the judge's guidelines, my father always made an effort to understand me. As I grew older, he acknowledged that he was worried that if he allowed me to skip the visits, my mother may pursue some nasty legal action. My mom was probably going to do this. I didn't want to cause my father any trouble after hearing this because I understood his motivations. I stopped requesting things like that and complied with the timetable. Let's go right to the subject now. My 18th birthday is in 2 weeks. Fortunately, my birthday coincides with the days I'm supposed to be with my dad. Thus, a month ago, he, Lila, and I began organizing my birthday. Nothing too extravagant, just a get-together with loved ones at my favorite pizza joint. A laid-back evening where I can enjoy myself and the people I care about. I enjoy singing, and the place provides karaoke. We invited everyone, including my mother, after making reservations and organizing everything. To be honest, I didn't really want her there, but I reasoned that since I won't be bound by the judge's regulations once I turn 18, this might be the only time I had to include her. In order to finalize the guest list for the pizza establishment, we sent out the invites 2 days ago and have already received the majority of the responses. My mother was the only one who hadn't replied. I told my dad that I wouldn't press the issue because I was okay with her not wanting to come if she didn't reply. Although he didn't express it publicly, I believe my dad was also a little relieved. This afternoon was when the drama began. In a furious phone call, my mother accused me of being immature and advised me to never make plans without first informing her. She frequently forgot my birthday, so it was hypocritical of her to complain now. I was perplexed and reminded her that I've always planned my birthdays with Dad and Lila. She became very furious as a result. Claiming Kira had been crying ever since she saw the invitation, she began to attack me. Kira had apparently already organized an entire birthday celebration for me. I couldn't speak. There is no relationship between Kira and me. She is the quintessential pampered brat who craves attention, and my mother has always encouraged this behavior, which has made it worse. We've never had a good relationship. Why Kira would want to plan a birthday celebration for me was beyond me. It was illogical. She didn't tell me why she did it, so I asked her. She didn't really expect me to have no plans for my 18th birthday, did she? It was absurd. According to my mother, it was meant to be a surprise, and she assumed I didn't want to do anything for my birthday because I hadn't told her about my intentions. She could have just asked, after all. The worst part, though, the one that made me lose my temper, is about to happen. Perhaps in an attempt to make me feel bad about what I would have missed, my mother began to detail everything Kira had arranged for my celebration. Kira's favorite hobby was everything, even the things I didn't enjoy. For instance, she had made lunch reservations at a fish restaurant. I avoid eating fish because it makes me sick, not because I'm impulsive. Even though I've had it checked, my body just rejects it. I'm not allergic. She also organized an afternoon event at a horseback riding ranch close to the city where my mom currently resides. Horses don't appeal to me. I'm afraid of riding them or being around something that large, but it's not that I don't enjoy them as creatures. The final plan was to return to my mom's house for a BBQ meal in the backyard. I simply didn't want to see my mother more than was absolutely required. Furthermore, my mother added that invitations had already been sent out. I was stunned at this moment. Since none of my pals, my dad, or his family had gotten anything, I had to inquire as to who they had shipped them to. It turned out that the majority of the people on the guest list were Kira's friends, Robert's family, and my mother's family. Under the guise of celebrating my birthday, Kira essentially planned a party for herself. I was unable to contain myself any longer. I hung up the phone after laughing in my mother's face. The entire situation was too absurd to be real. After a little while, my dad approached me and told me that my mom had phoned him because I had made fun of her. He became agitated and began telling me that they were attempting to be kind for once, regardless of how I felt about my mother. I immediately stopped him and gave him the party's specifics, which my mother had reportedly forgotten. His face shifted rapidly. I've been listening to him rage at my mother for the past 20 minutes or more, and he just said, "I'm going to make a phone call." When Lila heard about the issue, she came to me. She acknowledged my point of view, but suggested that laughing in my mother's face and hanging up wasn't the most responsible way to react. She wasn't upset, but she was a little let down that I hadn't handled it more politely. I thought about what I had done after she had gone. I don't think discussing it with my mother would have helped, but perhaps I was a bit harsh. I could have handled it better though. I am beginning to believe that I may have been a bit of a jerk at that time. In all honesty, though, what did she anticipate? That I would bow down and take the scraps that were thrown to me? She was obviously not thinking at all. As usual, she was simply following Kira's lead. The problem is that individuals like that depend on others to comply without protest. They are unable to cope with the inevitable counterattack. Was I able to be more courteous? Yes, most likely. Was my response entirely warranted? Oh, of course. To any stranger on the internet who might be reading this, I'm proud that I defended myself. I've developed strong bonds with my father and stepmother, and I'm really proud of myself for resisting my mother's foolishness. I hope you have a wonderful birthday. What about my mother? If I decide to stop communicating with her after my birthday, she's going to have a terrible awakening. To be honest, it's advantageous to all parties. I can appreciate Lila's perspective, but there's no reason to hold back if your parents don't accept you at almost 18. Updated. I first discussed my response to my mother with Lila. Lila has consistently stressed the value of communication and urged me to discuss my issues in order to find solutions. I realize the context of her remark regarding my actions. But I also expressed my opinion to her, telling her that I was laughing because it was the only natural response I had to the situation my mother was describing, which was too ridiculous. I honestly wondered at one point, is this a joke or some kind of nasty prank? Is she inventing this? Due to the fact that her foolishness was completely absurd. Although she acknowledged my viewpoint, Lila warned me that there will be times in life when I can't just chuckle and end the call. She was concerned about how I would respond and wanted to teach me how to deal with such circumstances in the future. I'm glad we had a conversation and were able to resolve the issue. I also discussed my dad's phone conversation with my mother. My mother apparently had a reason for everything. She said that Kira wanted to share her love of horseback riding with me, that she wanted to make a nice sisterly gesture on my special day, and that she didn't think my dislike of fish was a serious problem, just a whim. She even defended the fish restaurant by claiming that the fish they provided was the best in town. I threw up multiple times in front of her as a child, just because I was around areas that smelled strongly of fish, so that last excuse was a flagrant lie. She is well aware that I have a serious problem with it. My father said that Kira had obviously arranged the celebration for herself and that nothing they had prepared was done for me. He made the point that if none of my significant others were invited, it wasn't a party for me. Instead of reacting to this, my mother started to complain about how pampered and ungrateful I was. My dad then hung up the phone and told her to go to hell. I took another piece of advice from all of you after hearing this, and I wrote a letter to my mother. I decided to be mature this time and write it as courteously as I could. I stated I was sorry for laughing, but I explained that my only natural response to what she said was to laugh since it was so absurd. I reminded her that she doesn't know me at all, has never cared to get to know me, and never made an attempt to establish a relationship with me. I pointed out that they could enjoy the birthday celebration with their family and friends because it was full of things that Kira liked. Additionally, I informed her that her actions made it plain what her priorities were, so I rescinded her invitation to my pizza party and advised her not to bother attending. I said she wasn't on my list of priorities, which I now possessed. I informed her that I was already very happy having Lila as my mother. I asked her not to get in touch with me again and wished her well with her new family. I don't mind that she didn't reply after reading the message. She would have likely complained more about how spoiled and ungrateful I am if she had responded. She either doesn't understand or acts as though she doesn't, so there's no need in talking to her. But I feel more at peace now that I've made my feelings clear and this scenario is over. I'm grateful to everyone for assisting me in seeing that a definitive conclusion was required. My dad questioned my mom about how she could have thrown me a surprise party when I wasn't around. He also questioned how she could have believed that he wouldn't celebrate my 18th birthday. She clarified that Robert had made plans to come collect me on the morning of my birthday, but my dad took it a little personally. LOL. Under false pretenses, they planned to take me to my mother's house and explain the situation to Dad and Lila. To be honest, I have no idea how they anticipated this to function. No matter what reason they came up with, I would have flatly refused to visit my mom's house if it hadn't been her planned day. Above all, I would never have left Lila and Dad to celebrate my 18th birthday at my mother's house. A positive relationship between my mother and I would have been one thing, but that was certainly not the case. Robert is the only one I don't feel like blaming in all of this. Even though we were never close, he was always courteous to me when we shared a home. When I went to my mother's house, he even cleared out his study to give me a permanent place in his home. I don't blame him for anything because he always tried to be nice to me, even though we didn't form a stepdaughter-stepfather tie. He probably sincerely believes that the party is for me. We aren't close enough for him to understand my preferences unless my mother informed him, which I doubt she did. Fortunately, nothing of mine was left at my mother's place. My father's residence is where I keep all of my possessions. When I went to my mother's, I would usually fill my bag with the things I would need for the day and bring them back when I went to my father's. Because Kira's friends and Robert's family frequently visited, I never felt comfortable leaving anything with her because I didn't want my possessions in plain sight of strangers. That's about it for now. I hope my mother respects my decision to stop communicating with me and stops bothering me. Following the holidays, I would like to discuss the adoption with Leah. When we first discussed it, she appeared to be really happy. Once again, I want to thank everyone for their wisdom and nice thoughts. Your advice has improved my situational management. Although I acknowledge that I'm still a little immature, I believe this experience has allowed me to evolve and see the problem from a variety of angles. Best wishes to you? Yes, I considered contacting Robert, but I don't have his phone number. Since most of our meetings were friendly greets and light conversation, we never felt the need to stay in touch. The last time I left my mother's place, I believe Robert and I said our final goodbyes because I don't have Kira's number either. I don't spend a lot of time with my mother's relatives. My grandma, my aunt, and my uncle are the only 3 individuals involved. I've only seen my uncle a few times over the holidays when I'm spending time with my mother because he and his family reside a few hours away. Every time we interacted, it was short and far away. I only have friendly contact with my grandmother and aunt. They have given me money as birthday presents using my father's card, and we text each other holiday pleasantries, but that's about it. Even when we have met, our discussions have been informal and have only been exchanging life updates. They haven't texted me since the incident with my mother, and I didn't ask any of them until my 18th birthday. I believe they simply don't give a damn. Let's go on to the second tale. Before anyone told me directly, my wife's friend's Instagram account revealed our pregnancy, causing a flurry of activity and tears. She is 27 and I am 29. We both hail from the same hometown, but we currently reside in different cities. We have been dating for 4 years and married for 2. Because of work, I stayed behind while she attended a family gathering in our hometown. It finally happened after 3 months of trying to conceive. The manner I learned about it is the issue. In our group conversation, my friend thanked me by sharing a screenshot of an Instagram story that one of my wife's friends had shared. "You're going to be the best mom," was the caption on the photo, which included my wife sobbing and embracing a few of her pals. I immediately contacted her, and she picked up right away, saying, "I have news, babe." I only said, "I know, you're pregnant." "Wow, babe, how did you know?" I simply answered, "I saw it on Instagram." "Didn't think to give me a call first?" "What?" she asked. I said, "Yeah, but your friends posted something." "I didn't." "That's one way to know I'll become a father." I said, "Thank you," and hung up. I was enraged. She called repeatedly, but I didn't pick up until my sister called a short while later. My sister had just arrived at my in-laws' house, where everyone was fighting and panicking, and my wife was confined in her room, so she asked me what was going on. She exclaimed, "There's no way she would do that," when I told her what had happened. "Well, she did," I said. My sister promised to investigate the situation. She gave me a call back a little while later and gave me all the details. I had cooled down by then and assumed it was just a bad buddy who had chosen to post without authorization. However, my sister gave me the specifics. My wife was apparently having a late period, and while she was visiting a friend, they asked, "What if you're already pregnant?" They purchased numerous pregnancy tests, each of which produced good results. They emailed some local acquaintances to invite them over after becoming alarmed and telling her parents. Just 2 hours had gone by between the time she learned and the moment her buddy shared the information on Instagram. Before telling me, my wife told 10 or more individuals. For the record, when my sister came, she informed me that the reason for the disagreement was that the other friends were angry with the person who had posted on Instagram. Evidently, they were all upset with her and felt that was a horrible thing to do. However, they were equally baffled as to why my wife hadn't informed me earlier. When I eventually contacted my wife, she was in tears. She apologized and explained that she hadn't told me yet since she had been preparing to surprise me. I expressed skepticism, pointing out that she wouldn't have been prepared to tell me at the same moment I called if she had truly intended to surprise me. I told her I needed some time to reflect when she fell silent. She screamed that we needed to discuss it and that I couldn't just leave. "Why do we need to talk?" I answered. "So you can tell lies once more," and I ended the call. I've received a ton of messages, but I'm really worn out. I'm exhausted by this. I'm not sure why. I'm not a crier, therefore it's odd for me to cry at random. I feel like I've been struck by a truck, but this isn't supposed to be a big problem. "Hey, I know this sucks, and it was crappy of her, but don't let this ruin it for you," was the message my sister sent me, and it truly stuck. "You will become a father. You will make a fantastic father. This is fantastic. The knowledge that I will soon become a father is the only thing that keeps me going at the moment. This is what I've dreamed of, and my only wish is that the kid is well." To keep my wife from becoming very upset during the pregnancy, I'll probably swallow my pride and act as though nothing is wrong. But tomorrow, I'll do it. I'm going to just pout tonight. Edit. I didn't think much of posting this in the Reddit void, but when I woke up, I saw thousands of comments and dozens of direct messages. Holy. I sincerely appreciate your concern. Just to make a few points clear, is it possible that the baby is not mine? No chance. Classic Reddit LOL. She works from home, but that isn't possible because our house is equipped with home security cameras. Girls' nights are not something she does. I work with a female coworker who happens to be her best friend in the city where we live, and the three of us frequently hang out. They rarely spend time together in person, but they frequently text one another. If they do, I'll be in the adjacent room at our house. The clingiest person on the planet is my wife. She texts me every 30 minutes while I'm at work. She's usually in the same room as me or cuddling up to me when I'm at home. She holds my hand or arm when we're out. Most of the time, I genuinely enjoy it. I feel appreciated. However, it could be excessive. I even asked whether the argument we had weeks ago was the reason she didn't inform me straight away. However, it most likely isn't. Regarding her buddies, they are all really kind individuals. They've been in my life for a while. Some of the people in my sister's friend group have known each other since they were 12 years old. The only person who lives in a distant city is my wife. When she is in town, they always spend a lot of time together. I can't stress enough how completely out of character this is for her. Like everyone else, she has numerous shortcomings, but being careless is not one of them. She wouldn't intentionally do this, which is why I woke up in the middle of the night with the thought that I could be mistaken. No way. I texted her to let her know that everything was good and that I would make the 4-hour drive down there to speak with her. In fact, she asked if she might call when she was awake. After doing so, she expressed her desire to return home. I informed her that I will be picking her up. Are we all right? She questioned. She broke down in tears as soon as I said yes. I informed her that we would have to discuss it, but that I was thrilled and eager to meet her. After that, she became a little more composed. Update 1. Hi there once more. I'm here to give you an update now that everything has calmed down and I believe I have all the facts. My wife waited for me on the sidewalk when I arrived at my in-laws' house. She threw herself at me, apologized repeatedly, and simply gave me a hug while expressing her regret. Before our conversation, I told her I was quite exhausted and wanted to take a nap when we got to her room. We held each other while we slept. When we woke up, our conversation felt like a never-ending cycle in which I asked her what had happened and she responded that she was foolish and to blame. She insisted that since she had ruined a significant event in our lives, it didn't matter what occurred. She simply reiterated that she made a mistake and that nothing else mattered when I persisted in inquiring. She finally admitted that she didn't want to make excuses for me and that accepting responsibility and offering an apology was the proper course of action. After a while, I gave in and told her that everything was okay and that she was forgiven. Nevertheless, I wanted to speak with her buddy, who spent the entire day with her and purchased the pregnancy test for her. According to the friend's narrative, they freaked out for an hour and discussed how to surprise or tell me when my wife tested positive. When my mother-in-law finally arrived home, they all told her. To talk about how to inform me, they made the decision to bring a few girlfriends around. The friend discussed all of their opinions, and I completely agree with her. She added that the group had discussed it, which I was unaware of at the time, and that they should all be silent since we hadn't chosen when to make the announcement. It seems that the one girl who shared it on Instagram did it intentionally. At that time, they were even talking about methods to tell me with her there, even though she had been instructed not to speak. When she uploaded the photo, another buddy had just arrived and was informed of the situation. She immediately decided to publish about it for whatever reason. She first said she was unaware that she was not permitted to post it when they approached her. After maintaining that falsehood for some time, she just told everyone she didn't give a damn and walked away. We haven't heard from her since she blocked everyone in the group. Whether she was jealous of my wife or something else, no one knows why she did it. Right now, we don't give a damn. We too have her blocked, and we do not wish to communicate with her. The friend's account was later verified by my sister. She thought my wife had just told everyone and had forgotten to tell me when she originally called me with the details. However, after speaking with my mother-in-law and other friends, she shared the same tale with me. In addition, my mother-in-law, the friend I spoke with, and another acquaintance informed me that when I phoned my wife, she essentially said, "Screw it, I'm telling him right now." And she was quite eager to do so. During our return ride home, my wife and I spoke once more, although I already knew the majority of the details. Her side of the story was much the same as what my sister and the buddy told me. She apologized profusely once more and insisted that I was her top priority and that this was one of the worst things she had ever done. At her urging, we have a couples counseling session scheduled for next week. She feels that I need a place to completely express my thoughts, even though I don't think it's necessary. She fears that I'm holding everything inside and that I forgave her too quickly. To be honest, I'm already willing to forgive her and put this as a one-time incident because she cares about my sentiments. Additionally, we made our first visit to an obstetrician, not just because it's the correct thing to do, but also because I was warned by many about the dangers of miscarriages in the first trimester of pregnancy. The doctor indicated it was a little early for an appointment, and my wife's last period was approximately 6 weeks ago. However, after conducting numerous tests, they were able to determine that my wife is definitely pregnant. Everything appears to be going okay so far. Now to the next story, story 3. Fiancé blames me for his life choices, then breaks up. Am I the asshole for being disgusted and just saying okay? Original post. So, IDK man. I, 28, have been with my fiancé, Alex 34, since 2020. We met at a friend's party, hit it off, and have been together ever since. He finished his doctorate in economics just last year. Since then he has been working at the university. I have my master's in media sciences and decided to start working instead of going for a PhD. Okay, so the problem is that Alex broke up with me last Monday. It was literally so surreal and honestly, just weird. For the past few months, he'd been acting strange. He was making demands and then dropping them immediately. A few examples. He told me we were going to paint our walls back from dark green to white. When I asked why, he just said, "For fuck's sake, forget it," and never brought it up again, even when I asked. Another time, he came home and got mad because I was sitting on the couch with my head covered in a blanket. I had cramps. He was upset because I was just sitting there watching Netflix. Mind you, the house was spotless. When I tried to talk about it, he said, "Forget it, it's not a big deal." This kind of thing became common. Every time I tried to communicate, tried to figure out what was going on, whether it was something I did or maybe he was just stressed at work, he would just say everything was fine, but he was clearly seething with rage. I didn't even have to do anything. He would find something to complain about: the apartment, clothes, me, work, etc. So I gave him space, which apparently was also wrong. I told him I was going to help my parents with repairs for a few days, and somehow that was also wrong because he wanted to renovate the apartment too. Then, on Monday, I got a text saying we needed to talk. I knew what was coming, and after the last few months, I had made peace with it. When I came home, he was sitting on the couch. He didn't even wait for me to take off my jacket before saying, "I want to break up." Then the verbal diarrhea started. He told me he resented me. First, because I didn't pursue my academic career further, even though I was capable, and he didn't want to upset me at the time. Then, when I started making more money, since he didn't make much as a PhD student, he felt like I should have the last word financially, and he hated it. Mind you, I never said anything like, "It's my money, so I have the final say." That's a rule he imposed on himself, and he hated it. He said he hated our paint scheme, the couch, and even our fucking crockpot. Then, he told me he had rejected a better PhD program to stay here because I had already started my job by the time he got the acceptance letters. Only, he never told me he had even applied overseas. He said a few months ago he checked in with a friend who's in that program, saw how they were thriving, and decided I ruined his life. He said I had too much control over his life and that he hated the idea that I could just decide not to pay for things and fuck him over. I honestly don't even know what that means. He also said he hated that all his friends loved me and didn't let him vent about me. Then he said again, "I'm done." I was floored. I had already made peace with the idea that we were ending, and it hurt, but after that rant, I was just disgusted. I looked at him, probably with a disgusted expression, and said, "Okay?" He lost it. He said this is exactly what he meant, that it was horrible. We had been together for 4 years, and all I had to say was okay to our breakup. I just asked if he wanted to stay here while he figured out where to go. He said, "Typical, of course you're holding the apartment over me," and started ranting again, so I just left. I told my parents, and they're also confused. My dad suggested I reach out to our landlord and explain the situation to see what options I have. I can keep paying the rent no problem myself. He covered the utilities and some subscriptions. Just to reiterate, I never had a problem with this. I saw that he was chasing his dream, and that was more important to me than a 50-50 financial split. I make good money and am happy at my job. I never saw it as slaving away. I always had the mentality that my money was our money because we were building a life together. Of course, I had my own savings and fun money, but I honestly never cared. As long as I felt he was working towards something and wasn't taking advantage of me, I was fine with it. More than fine. Alex is still mad. He's going between texting me like a robot about the logistics of the split to being a seething asshole complaining about everything. I'm not even hurt anymore. I just feel nauseated by him at this point. I don't know. Should I have reacted differently? Edit. Thank you for all your opinions. It was nice to get this off my chest, lol. Just to clarify, that I don't feel like a victim. I feel like something happened, and my relationship just turned bad. He behaved like an asshole, but that is the extent of it. Very clearly, something is going on. But he doesn't want me to be part of whatever it is, and I have to respect that. Now I just have to detangle myself legally from him, and after that, I'll just be left alone with my ugly green wall color. I think I might also adopt a cat as my ex was really allergic. Some of OOP's comments. Commenter, NTA. Dude basically said he hates you and everything about you. What are you supposed to do? Beg for his love when you can find someone who'll give it to you readily? Nah. Sorry this happened and that you were blindsided, but this will be a good thing in the long run. On to the next. FYIW. He sounds jealous, insecure and emotionally stunted. If what you've written is how things played out, then you dodged a huge bullet. Ope. He was basically doing his own renditions of 10 things I hate about you. I don't know. I mean, he wants to break up with me. Why would I plead? It is done to a deleted comment. I was really confused trying to take everything in. He talked really fast and a lot. So I did not know what else to say. Also because everything I do is wrong. I think he would have been even more annoyed if I started to cry or something. Ghost him now. I can't ghost him. We have to talk about the lease, about our wedding savings account and a few other things. To another commenter. Yes, that is easy said. But I have to wait to get a response from the landlord, we have to inform the bank, etc., etc. So until I don't have confirmation that I am in the clear, I am keeping him unblocked. I have him muted. The all commenter. Sounds like his ego couldn't handle you being the breadwinner. Not your problem, he could have communicated like an adult rather than seething in his own insecurities. He sounds emotionally weak. Oop. Which is so dumb. He is a doctor in economy and past pursuing becoming a professor. Commenter. Dude basically hates himself for decisions he took without ever consulting you. He chose his comforts, but now since others seem in a better position, he is venting on you and making you the culprit. NTA. But your man has a little brain and doesn't know what to do with it. Oop. I would have supported him if he wanted to move away. IDK if we would have stayed together because LDRs are hard, but I would have been 100% supportive. Maybe he resented you for being successful while he wasn't. But that is the thing. He was successful. He has even published a few papers in important magazines and is on the way to become a junior professor. He is objectively really successful. This is all just so weird. Commenter. Girl, I've been with a man like that. They want drama. They want toxicity. They will fuck up your life out of pure insecurity and hate. You dodged a massive bullet. I'm sorry this happened, you deserve better. Wish you the best OOP. Then I hope he meets the telenovela star of his dreams. I prefer my boring happy life. Commenter. What country are you in? Here in the US, the average person would have accumulated debt if they made it that far in their education. Germany update. Post. To start, Alex moved out pretty quickly after the breakup. He has been staying with a friend, and we sorted out everything like mail, subscriptions, and the lease. I'm also in the process of adopting a cat. Her name is Luna, but I have been thinking about changing it since my family already has 2 pets named Luna, Amun, and Kamar. She is still at her foster home for now, but I have visited her a few times, and I already adore her. She is a scrappy little tabby who follows her foster mom around like a shadow, and I can't wait for her to move in during the first week of December. I've already gotten her bowls, toys, and a bed by the window ready. Now on to what happened. Last week, I was out showing someone around the city. He is the son of my parents' friends who recently moved here for work. My parents asked me to help him get familiar with the area, so I agreed. It was nothing special, just walking around, grabbing coffee, and pointing out useful spots in the city. Apparently, Alex saw us. I didn't even realize he was there, but later that night, I started getting texts from an unknown number. I guess he got a new number since I blocked his old one. The texts were just weird. He accused me of flaunting my new relationship in public, said I must have been seeing this guy before we broke up, and told me that everything he suspected about me was true. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to entertain his paranoia. The messages kept coming though. They went from angry to desperate, with him saying things like, "At least admit you were lying to me," and, "Was anything about us even real?" It was exhausting and honestly a little scary to see how quickly he spiraled. For the record, this guy isn't my boyfriend. He's not even someone I'm interested in. He's just the son of family friends who needed help settling into the city. The whole thing was completely innocent, but Alex has twisted it into some kind of betrayal in his head. What gets me is how little Alex seems to know me. I'm not the type of person to jump into a relationship so soon after everything that happened. Even if I were, it wouldn't be any of his business. We are done. I've made that clear. After I didn't respond to his texts, Alex started calling. I didn't pick up, but the voicemails were a mix of angry rants and desperate pleas. I ended up blocking his new number too. It feels ridiculous that I have to keep doing this, but I guess this is where we are now. Then this weekend, I went out to a bar with my friends. A few hours in, guess who walked in? Alex. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if he followed me there, but as soon as he spotted me, he came straight over. He was clearly upset, asking to talk, and I told him no. My friend stepped in, and thankfully, he left without causing a scene, but it ruined my night. It felt like I couldn't escape him, no matter where I went or what I did. When I got home later that night, I was completely drained. I had just started to relax when I heard a knock on my door. It was Alex, standing there in tears. He started crying, saying he missed me, that he didn't understand why I was doing this to him, and that he didn't know how to move on. It was like all the anger from earlier had been replaced with this desperate sadness. I didn't let him in. I told him he needed to leave, and if he didn't, I would call someone to make him leave. He begged me to listen, but I just closed the door. I spent the rest of the night feeling shaken and honestly a little scared. I don't know what he's going through. I wrote to his best friend about the situation but pleaded to talk to him. He said he would. I'm seriously considering getting a new phone number and possibly even talking to someone about how to handle this legally if it keeps happening. It feels unfair that I have to go to these lengths just to have some peace, but I don't see another option. Update post 2, November 28, 2024, 3 days later. Thanks for the concern and support I've received. I'm fine, really. A lot of people suggested things like getting a restraining order, but I just want to clarify that it's not as simple as walking into an office and asking for one. The process involves proving there's an immediate danger to your safety, providing evidence like texts, calls, or witnesses, and then attending court to get approval. It's not something you can do lightly or without solid proof. And no, I'm obviously not getting a gun. I've also seen people diagnosing Alex with various mental health issues, and I want to ask everyone to stop. Yes, something is clearly wrong, but I'm not a doctor, and neither are most of you. It's not fair or helpful to label him with something like bipolar disorder or anything else without real expertise. For what it's worth, I don't actually feel like I'm in danger. In the past month, these were the only 3 incidents that happened. I don't think he's actively stalking me so much as he just knew my patterns. The bar we were at is my favorite spot, and it was a party of one of my closest friends, so it makes sense that he might have guessed I'd be there. When he showed up at my apartment, he knew what time I usually got home. The city tour is the only thing that might have been more intentional, but it could also have been a coincidence that triggered everything. Anyway, this is the end of it. Yesterday, Alex came over with his mom and one of his friends. At first, I didn't want to let him in, but he promised me that this would be the last time I ever saw him. I agreed, mostly because his mom and friend were there, and I figured it would be more awkward to argue on my doorstep. When we sat down, Alex admitted that he was going through a crisis. He told me he was mad at me, but he didn't know why. He said he doesn't like me, that I annoy him, but that he weirdly still loves me, which is why he went crazy when he saw me with someone else. He assured me there wasn't anyone else on his end either. He said he felt like he was going insane. He talked about how he feels judged for being older and not being able to give me the life he thinks I deserve. He said he hates his colleagues, hates his job, hates everything right now, and that everyone and everything annoys him. He told me he feels old and like he should want kids at this point in his life, but he doesn't, and that thought terrifies him. He said he just wants to be alone and not talk to anyone for a while. I didn't say much. I mostly just nodded because I didn't know what to say. After he was done, he told me he was leaving. He's on some kind of mental health leave from work, and he said he's leaving the country on Sunday. He's going to South America to spend time in nature and find himself. He thanked me for everything and said he was sorry for how he acted. Then he just got up, grabbed the few things he had left at my place, and walked out. His mom was inconsolable. She kept apologizing to me over and over, saying how embarrassed she was by his behavior. I told her it was okay and that she didn't need to apologize to him. She cried a lot, and his friend ended up driving her home after Alex left. I don't really know how I feel about all of this. Part of me is relieved that it's over. Part of me feels sad for him because he clearly doesn't know how to deal with everything he's feeling. Mostly, though, I just feel tired. I'm glad he's taking steps to figure himself out, but it's not my responsibility anymore. Some of OOP's comments on not getting a gun, editor's note. It was more than likely a downvoted troll who asked, but I liked OOP's response. You can't buy guns at an Aldi. It's more dangerous to own a gun when you have no training with it than not owning one. Commenter. He's a little young for a midlife crisis, but certainly, the man is having issues with his life choices, and it's tearing him apart. Your empathy is warranted, but in the end, those troubles are his, not yours. Hopefully, this is the last you'll hear of him. Good luck to you. Oop. It's just a life crisis then, I guess. Who knows? Update, same post. December 3, 2024, 5 days later, about 6 weeks from OG post. Edit December 3. He is definitely gone. My friend sent me some of his Insta stories of him at the airport and then about a day later in Bogota. So, yep, he is gone. I am safe, and on Friday, I get to pick up Helios Maximus first, LOL, Heli for short. Now, on to the next story, story 4. Am I the asshole for ruining an engagement by revealing the truth about my horrible ex from 10 years ago? Original post. A little backstory is needed, so please stick with me. Growing up, I, F27, had a childhood friend Angie, F27, who was as close as a real sister. We spent entire weekends at each other's place, celebrated family events, etc., from 6 years old till 18 years old. Elle even lived at her place in 2nd grade while my parents went to a nasty divorce. I learned to speak some Russian, as she is Russian, and she learned to speak some Spanish. Needless to say, her older brother and little sister were like a family to me. During our teenage years she had her 2 male best friends, one whom she started dating, and another one, Nico, now 29, who was Russian as well, whom I started dating at 17. Growing up I had issues with a heart condition. I won't bore you with the details, but I had to take a lot of meds, but got healthier starting from the 16th. I didn't have to take them daily but only when my heart rate became irregular, but then immediately, as it would become extremely painful, my heart would cramp, I would start to hyperventilate. All my friends knew this, Nico included, and that I would black out if my meds got taken with alcohol. I didn't smoke much or drink much growing up as a result, since I was worried about my health and only did drink at home or in a safe setting. Legal drinking age is 16 here and I only drank wine or beer if at all. I had my first time with Nico at 17 and when my parents stayed at a retreat 2 weeks later he came over to have a date night. I did drink 1 glass of wine, but started having health issues later resulting in me taking my meds and being unconscious. I was a bit sore the next morning but didn't think much about it. 2 weeks later I'm informing Nico that I'm late on my period and he starts to panic, confessing he had sex with me while I was unconscious. We had it before, so he didn't think much about it. Apparently he didn't have a condom but since I was on the pill he figured it was all right, and he also didn't come in me, but in a tissue. I felt violated and disgusted by myself. I didn't know how to describe this and only told Angie about it. I was an utter mess for a few years, and wasn't able to have sex again until 2 years later. I didn't remember any of it, but was too ashamed to go to my mom or anybody else. I didn't think of it as rape back then, I was too young to really understand what and how I was violated, and Angie told me it's all right, I should break up if I feel bad about it, but we were in a relationship and did have sex before. I broke up with him the following day, and apparently he cried about his broken heart to her. As Nico and Angie were close and hanging out together a lot, they started dating a few months afterwards and I had to see him every time when visiting her. I told her I'm not able to see him, but she didn't understand where I'm coming from. The contact stopped and we haven't texted or seen each other in years. I still followed her and her family and saw that her brother is expecting his first child. As I was extremely close with her family, I just commented on the Insta post expressing my gratitude when he reached out to me. I missed his wedding but he wanted to ask if I would be interested in joining the baby shower as it's been years and we've been extremely close before. He told me I was like a third little sister. I just asked if Nico will be attending as well, as Angie and him have been dating for 9 years now, and he said yes. I didn't elaborate much but just expressed that I'll send a small present if he can give me his current address but won't be attending. He kept on pestering me what exactly happened all those years ago and why I'm not in their lives anymore. Angie told her family I'm not able to see her with an ex of mine, but her brother thought there's more behind it. This is when I think I could be the asshole. I told him the truth about what happened back then. And while I didn't know it at 17, I know now that this was rape and I named it as such. I didn't receive any message back from him but a few days later Angie reached out to me, furious. Nico had planned to propose during the baby shower, but Angie's brother is against it now, having learnt why I stopped the contact. She loves Nico and will stay with him, but by doing so, her brother said she is no longer a part of his life, as he doesn't want his little baby girl in the same family as a rapist. Since then I've been getting messages from old high school acquaintances, telling me I should have ignored it and not told anybody. Since I didn't speak up back then, I lost the right to do so now, and am a horrible person for ruining somebody's life over some stuff he did 10 years ago when he himself was a child as well. Am I truly the asshole for speaking up? ATA has no consensus bot, OP was NTA. Relevant comments. OP responds to multiple comments about how things are wrong, and she could speak up. OOP. I understand now how wrong it has all been, and that it's rape. But we grew up in a small town with approximately 5,000 people, and I honestly don't know which way it would have gone if I would have spoken up. He was 19 back then, 2 years older, and everybody is in everybody's business. It would have made sound back then, like it does now. They all still live there, and it has made its rounds. That's why so many of our old classmates are reaching out. Most of those who still live there have left me furious messages. They have known Nico for all their life, and are standing by him. I moved out when I was 20, my mom shortly after, and didn't stay in touch most. It still breaks my heart to get such a furious response from people who are my whole childhood. And thank you for all your best wishes, I genuinely appreciate it. OP did not ruin Nico's life. He did this himself. OP. I understand that what happened is on him. The backlash I am getting is because he apparently is not that person anymore, and in something he did as a teenager, according to Angie, should not ruin his life and is in no way related to the daughter her brother will have. I don't know if he will ever act out or do something, but it doesn't invalidate what happened to me, so thank you for confirming this. I just can't stop feeling bad about this having so many consequences. While I do not want to see Nico or Angie, I have made my peace with what happened to me back then. Commenter. But why are they attacking you and not the brother? You are not the one objecting to the marriage. Just feels like misogyny and victim blaming tbh. OOP. I guess because he is family, and I'm the outsider who ruined their family. I have been getting so many messages from people who didn't even have my number back then. I'm blocking the best I can, it's just hard to not let these comments get to your heart. Commenter. NTA. They got together so soon after the two of you broke up. I can't help but wonder if your friend was convincing you to break up with Nico because she was hoping to get with him all along. OPO, I honestly don't believe it. They've known each other for years and she broke up with her boyfriend 2 weeks before I broke up with Nico. It was a 5K town, even adding the people our age from nearby villages. Our school had 500 people attending, hence the options are very limited. OP on getting therapy in order to heal from her past trauma. OP. I was in therapy for 2 years and found peace with what happened to me. I am lucky, as I have no memory of it, but that didn't make it easier. It took me 2 years to be able to have any form of sexual contact again, but I am okay now. It's a part of me, but it's a part I can live with. Honestly, thank you for your kind words. OP on her health issues at the time when the incident happened. OP. Oh, it's not drunk blacked out. My medicine back then was supposed to lower my heart rate extremely, as I would have a racing heartbeat and my body would start to shut down, hyperventilating, my heart not being able to follow such strong use, and basically tripping over the high heart rate. My heart would start skipping beats, then not being able to follow my thin blood which flows faster than regular one, and the skipping would be the painful one, as it would start to cramp up. I'm sorry I'm not able to explain it better, English is not my primary language and I lack the medical vocabulary to fully describe it. The pill slowed my heartbeat and general body functions, thus making me extremely tired. I'd mixed it with alcohol. It would basically act like a super strong sleeping pill. My body could be thrown off a cliff and I wouldn't wake up. I did give consent for the first time we had sex, but that was our first and only time. I don't know if we would have had sex back then if I would have been conscious, as I didn't like it, being my first time and all, and wasn't that eager to repeat it. I don't think calling it rape is wrong, but what I had issues was if I should have approached this subject more sensible. In that way I can understand that I ruined their engagement plans for next week, or his surprise of one update one. First of all, I am immensely thankful for all the people who took the time to not only read through my story but also comment. I read every single comment and tried to respond to as many as possible. It gave me a little bit of hope of compassion for victims of rape and also the courage to not cave to the backlash I received. Mental update. Reading all the messages defending my choices on speaking up made me realize how insecure I was about what I am allowed to do and how much I was trying to make it right to other people besides myself. This especially included Nico and Angie. All of you are right. If Nico had changed, he would have apologized. reached out or tried to make amends in some way. Either when word got to him from his brother-in-law or at some earlier point in his life. My former best friend Angie should have been able to feel some sort of compassion if she had any respect for me as a human being or the time we spent together. Her reaction showed that I shouldn't hesitate in my actions. I went to therapy from 21 onwards and thought I moved on from the rape as best as I could, but I realized how ashamed I still am almost 10 years later about an incident that wasn't my fault at all. I was ashamed to speak up back then and afraid that people around me would look differently at me. And somehow I still felt bad about speaking up today, so I am trying to own what happened to me now and not apologize for other people's behaviors, especially as they don't even show me respect. What happened since then? I archived every nasty message I got on WhatsApp so I wouldn't have to read them, but would have the proof if needed at a later point. Angie's mom called me the following day of the incident, crying. I shouldn't have answered the phone, but during the 10 years of friendship I saw her as an aunt, almost a second mom. She always joked that while her children would run around the house doing whatever, I would always take the time to drink tea and talk with her, showing her more love and time than her actual children. While she said she's sorry for what has been and for what I went through as a child, she couldn't believe that I would ruin Angie's happiness over something like that. With Angie's brother refusing to have Nico as part of the family and Angie standing by Nico's side, it's divided their family and she is heartbroken. She has grown to love Nico like family as well and has known him for nothing more than a considerate young man who she knows will make her daughter happy. It wasn't nasty names or angry talk, just a heartbroken mother who faked to acknowledge my pain and saw the fault in me. Angie's mom tried to get me to apologize or to take it back, but I refused as I don't see the fault in me. With everything that has happened, I believe that Nico hasn't changed and is just hiding it better somehow. He can see how people are standing by him and supporting his behavior so he won't have to change. And that is something I didn't want to indulge. Angie's mom not even one used the word rape, and I tried to correct her every time she talked about it. Trying to name it for her to understand better, but she would just start sobbing more and it didn't make sense for us to continue to talk. Angie's mom used to be in contact with mine for some time, and she reached out to her after our talk. I was afraid that my mom would find out, since she's from a more conservative background. We had a long talk and I didn't get to see her, physically, yet, but she apologized for not being there for me or not making me feel like I can talk to her. I tried to calm her as best as I could, but when she asked me if my current partner knows I was used like that, I got angry. She was scared my partner would leave me if he found out, implying it was something that made me less precious or appealing. When she asked me to keep it a secret from our family abroad and in our country, I hung up. She was acting exactly the way I was afraid she would, as if it's something shameful. It was especially hard as I am trying my best to move away from the feeling of shame. She has since apologized, but it's clear that her view of me has changed. I don't yet know how to deal with it, but that's something to worry about in the next few weeks. As some of you suggested, I wrote Angie's brother, Sven, again and apologized for the mess, but am glad that it is out in the open and how proud I am that he's defending his family. I asked if his old email is still working as I would just send a gift card. He didn't respond, but I got a message from his wife 2 days ago. She thanked me for speaking up and informing them about Nico. There were apparently a few moments that made her uncomfortable, some jokes Nico made, and in retrospective she can see why. Sven apparently informed her the moment he got my initial text, and both of them have since seen Angie but not Nico. She refuses to be in the same room or house as him, and the same goes to their unborn daughter. Sven and Angie's mom has been at their place multiple times to beg to forgive Nico, and Sven caved a little. Angie and Nico will get married. Sven will attend but his wife will not. He is allowed in the family but not in contact with either Sven's wife or daughter. Those restrictions are not for Angie. Sven was suffering trying to ease his mother's worries and was not able to take a stand and cut them out completely. This is a compromise they made without his wife's approval, and she told me she's trying her best to cut them out of their life indefinitely. She wanted to move back, closer to her family as well, and thinks this is a perfect opportunity but isn't sure if she can follow through. His wife told me she's terribly sorry for all the issues that came my way and it has been a lot trying to handle the situation on their side. Sven knows it's not my fault but he doesn't want contact. It's hard for him to talk or see my name because even though he knows I'm not the guilty party, in some way I was the bearer of bad news and he sees me as the start of all this drama. She told me a few times that neither believe I'm the bad guy, they just are tired with everything and it's just been extremely hard on them. That's all that has happened so far. I am frustrated about how everything came to be. It feels like Nico will just continue with his life without having to be remorseful. I didn't want him to suffer, but I think some part of me wanted to at least receive some kind of apology for all the suffering I went through afterwards. I'm having to deal with my mother and her changed shameful view on me, And even though I'm happy it's all out, it's extremely hard to stand by my choices. My partner and my best friends both have been my shoulder to cry on during this ordeal. My best friend was especially enraged for me, and I am extremely grateful to have both by my side. Right now I'm just emotionally drained, but I'm sure it will be better once a few weeks pass. Comments. Commenter 1, you spoke up and did the right thing. If others can't handle the truth, that's their problem. Keep focusing on your healing and support. Commenter 2. NTA. Unfortunately, it's a tale as old as time. The woman is blamed and the rapist gets off without a blemish. Only by speaking the truth over and over will the situation improve, and when the boomers die off. Commenter 3. 100% the right thing. What you did may keep Nico from attacking someone else, or may encourage one of his other victims to step up. You never know how much people like you help everyone else, when you stand up and speak out and are not ashamed of what was not your fault, but will point the finger at the one to shame. You're making the world a better place. I'm sorry for the family Nico misled and the wife who was foolish enough to stay with him, but it's no longer your business. You did the right thing and it's going to help others. If no one else says it to you, thank you for doing all this. You are amazing. Update 2. My first post was 3 months ago and this one will be my last update for now. It is not a good one, but I sincerely wish to leave it all behind me. That includes distancing myself from this Reddit account. These posts helped me let go of my anger, similar to a journal, and I am grateful for all the people who are enraged with me. I hope to open it again someday, with a final happy update, but for now every little pop-up is a reminder of the anxiety I am still dealing with, and I do not have the energy to deal with this topic outside of my therapy anymore. Short summary for those who don't want to read the old post. Nico raped me when I was his girlfriend 10 years ago. I didn't see it as rape back then as I was unconscious. Afterwards I broke up with him. Shortly after, my best friend Angie from elementary school started dating him and they have been together for almost 10 years. I couldn't bear seeing him and cut contact with her and her family, with whom I was really close. Her brother Sven reached out to me 3 months ago after I left a short congratulation on a pregnancy picture with his wife. He invited me to their baby shower and I declined. After a lot of back and forth about him asking me and being suspicious as to why the contact broke off in the first place, and why I refused to be in the same space as his sister's boyfriend, I confessed what happened back when I was 17. Afterwards his family had a huge fight, with him wanting to cut Nico out of their lives for being a rapist and his mom and sister standing by Nico. I was the scapegoat and received a log of hurtful messages from both their friends and former classmates. They called me out on ruining a man's life based on a childish mistake. Nico was 19 back then. And even Angie's mom reached out to me. I was left to pick up my life, my mom being more ashamed than understanding, and started therapy again. I removed almost everybody tied to that incident: Sven, Angie, Nico, their family, old classmates. And only kept contact with old classmates who sended me messages of support. Update 2. I work in a very specialized field. To get the proper qualification it takes on average 6 to 8 years, bachelor, master and then state bar to be allowed to practice. While it is not very competitive, not a lot of people choose this profession, and it is highly sought after. My current company paid for my master's and my extensive course as preparation for the bar exam, and I have been doing well there. My HR department called me 2 months ago. Apparently they have been getting a lot of outside calls from Angie's mother and other relatives, saying I am involved in a Me Too scandal and being a liability for the company as I don't have issues ruining the lives of men. How they could imagine this could change anything I do not understand. I work for a global company, they have known me for years, I never had any issues prior and quite frankly, they do not care. However, they have been getting frustrated with the amount of calls and apparently even reached out to the police and the calls have stopped since. Nonetheless, they reached out to me to check on my mental well-being, offering to give me paid leave, till it settles a little bit, and offering company-paid therapy. Therapy is covered by my country's health insurance, but it is tricky to get one without waiting time, but I already had my old one on retainer and started going right after the incident. They made it clear that they invested a good amount of money in me and do not wish to lose me. I was ashamed that this part of my private life slipped into my professional one. It started to influence the career I worked hard for years to build, and while my company assured me that it would not affect the workload and clients I'm getting, word got around, and it was clear for my colleagues that I am going through something nasty, and the company does not want to deal with it. All this stress and anxiety led me to hyper-focus on my work. I took on whatever I could, paranoid that another call would come and for whatever reason, the company would move me to a dead-end department where my career would basically be over. At the same time, I started looking into different companies, who would be able to buy me out, As I am tied to my current company for 5 years after graduation, 3 more are left and I got a management position in a rival company with a huge salary jump. I couldn't be happy about it, I was just relieved I wouldn't get the pity looks from my colleagues anymore. I went to the police with all the hateful messages and the HR protocol with the call history and got a restraining order for Angie's mom. Should she contact my new company again, I have a public LinkedIn, it is needed for my job. At least I have some sort of proof that her words hold no meaning. I got asked if I want to pursue the rape but decided against it. It would open the whole ordeal again. I don't have proof, besides Nico and Angie not denying it, and quite honestly was afraid of what it would do to my career. I did keep contact with a good friend of mine who grew up in the same small town but moved away 5 or so years ago. As we share a Nintendo Switch online family account, so we tend to be in contact at least once a year for a short phone call when she has to send me the money for the subscription, and we just tend to make a phone call with updates out of it. Yesterday was one of those days and the whole Nico thing came up. While she didn't hear it directly, her mom is still living in the small town and reached out to her, asking if I'm alright. She expressed her disapproval about how everything came to be, as she was close with Angie back in the days as well and remembered how close we were and how often we spent time together, like sisters. She informed me that 2 months later, 7 baby girls were born, and while neither Nico or Angie were seen in any of the pictures or stories with the baby, a month ago Angie and Nico had an engagement party. Both Sven, the baby, and his wife participated, and are in the family pictures. I remember how enraged Sven's wife was, and how she told me she herself felt I was comfortable with Sven. Now it is all forgotten and forgiven. Nico's parents own a few houses and gave Angie and Nico a house close to their home, and Sven and his wife apparently bought a house in the same street. It is as if nothing happened at all. Listening to my friend telling me the updates, I'm honestly not sure if I should have asked her to not tell me anything. I just feel empty and betrayed. Not by Angie, she made her choice, not by Sven, it is his sister, and at the end of the day when he asked me what happened and then didn't have the decency to answer me because he saw me as the one who ruined his family, it was clear that the truth didn't matter. Not by Sven's wife, who has a baby girl, an innocent daughter who she should protect as a mother, even though she told me she would do her best to keep her daughter away from Nico, but just by life. I fought to have it all behind me, just to have this old wound ripped open again 3 months ago when Sven kept plastering me. I got hate messages, but knowing that maybe someone would be hesitant towards Nico, when he showed strange behavior, made me feel like maybe I did right. Maybe by speaking up I helped a girl out to not be raped. My own mother was ashamed of what happened to me, told me I was to keep it quiet so my family abroad wouldn't get to hear it. Just for it all to be all good again for Nico. After everything that happened these last 3 months, I truly understand why victims of rape chose not to speak up. Relevant comments. Commenter 1. As a victim of the same type of abuse, though not RP, from a former romantic partner, you are worth more than you think. You do not need to suffer in silence, or shame. You didn't do anything wrong, or anything to be ashamed of. I am so proud of you for telling your truth. From one survivor to another, you are worthy of love, acceptance, and happiness. Life hasn't betrayed you, even though it feels like the world and everyone in it has turned their back on you. People do care, you matter, and you will outshine the shadows of your past when you find the courage to embrace the future with open arms. I believe in you, and I am proud of you. Keep being you. Commenter 2. I hope you get to heal and have no shame. From the interaction with your mother, she sounds Latin, which can be very tricky with this stuff. Nevertheless, the reaction is not on you but on her. Deutsch? I am unsure if so, but in some small tiny towns they are very backwards. All that doesn't matter, you get to deal with this at whatever rhythm you feel comfortable. You are not used. You are not less than, you are a woman that has survived. I send you a big hug. Ope. Yes, my mom is Latin, but I grew up in a small village with maybe 5,000 people. My grandpa used to be a pastor, which makes it so much harder. Even though my mom has been living in Germany for 30 years, speaks perfectly even with the local dialect, she's not progressive. It doesn't help that the small village itself isn't progressive either. I moved out at 18 and never looked back. In her eyes it is my fault since I had a boyfriend at 17 and now I am damaged goods because of the rape. We don't talk about her hurtful words anymore and she is trying her best to be more understanding, but at the end of the day it is internalized. I know I am not less, but after everything surfaced, the shame, the anxiety and less just came back, after I worked years to get over it. It will take time, I'm sure I'll get there again, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. My partner is telling me over and over again, reminding me of my worth, and I am sure one of these days it's going to stick. Thank you for your words. Now to the next story. 5. My mother always defended my older brother, but when he stole my younger brother's fiancée, our family could never be mended. My mother wants me and my brothers to overlook the fact that our younger brother's fiancée was stolen by our cunning golden child older brother. I never imagined that my family would fall apart in this way. A year ago, I would have laughed if someone had predicted that my elder brother, Caleb, would do something so heinous. My mother has always led us to believe that Caleb is the golden child, the one who did everything correctly. However, I can't stop thinking about how we got here as I sit here in my apartment and relive the nightmare that occurred only a few weeks ago. Logan's wedding, or what was meant to be Logan's wedding, was the beginning. Logan, my younger brother, is the most sincere individual I've ever encountered. He is a gentle, considerate man, who would give you his last dollar without hesitation. We were all overjoyed when he proposed to Avery. Avery seemed to love Logan as much as he loved her, and she was intelligent and humorous. Together, they were ideal. They were one of those couples you can tell is meant to be. And then there was Caleb. Even now, the details remain unclear. Logan and Avery were choosing flowers and completing the guest list one week. Avery was canceling the wedding the next week. Logan arrived at my door completely broken, which is why I can still clearly recall that day. His eyes were red-rimmed from sobbing, and his face looked pallid. He informed me that Avery had broken up with him. She simply stated that she couldn't carry it out without providing an explanation. I initially believed it might be chilly feet. Yes, that does happen. Weddings are a stressful event. Then, however, the truth was revealed. Avery and Caleb, who was supposed to be Logan's best man, appeared at a family BBQ less than 3 days later. We were all invited over for family time by my mom, Linda. I wanted to see how Logan was doing because I hadn't seen him since he arrived at my door crying. Caleb holding Avery's hand as they walked into the backyard as if it were the most natural thing in the world is something I will always remember. The whole yard fell silent, as if someone had put life on hold. As I tried to take in what I was seeing, I glanced at Avery and then at Caleb. "What on earth is this?" Louder than I intended, I asked. The king of smug smiles, Caleb, shrugged as if it didn't matter. He declared, "Avery and I are now together." Thankfully, Logan wasn't around, but my sister Riley dropped the pitcher of lemonade she was pouring. The patio's glass broke. I couldn't read my mother's expression as she looked at Caleb, but it wasn't one of shock. For me, that was the first warning sign. Linda had forewarned no one, but she instinctively knew this was happening. "You're kidding," I responded, trembling. Avery refused to look at me, so I hoped this was some terrible joke. Her face reddened with guilt, but she continued to stare at the grass. I've detested Caleb's calm-down expression since we were young. In a frustratingly casual tone, he stated, "It's complicated, Mason. But everyone will benefit from this." "For everybody?" I lost my temper. "How about Logan? You just took your brother's fiancée, but what about that?" The term "stole" made Avery wince, but Caleb didn't even pause. The relationship between her and Logan didn't work out. "This wasn't planned," he said. I made sure he didn't finish though. Too furious to even look at him, I bounded away. Riley came into the kitchen after me. "Did you see Mom?" she said, trembling. She said nothing at all. She seems to be fine with this. The second warning sign was that Caleb had always held a special place in Linda's heart. Being the eldest, he made the family proud with his corporate career and college degree. Logan and I, on the other hand, were just Logan and me. I used to make a joke about us being the family's spare parts, but it didn't feel humorous anymore. I gave Logan a call later that evening. I asked him if he was aware of Avery and Caleb. He didn't. He sounded hollow when I told him, not even upset. Silently. "Of course it was Caleb," he said. "It's always Caleb." The consequences were immediate. Riley completely cut all communication with Caleb. He dismissed my attempt to confront him once more, claiming that I was exaggerating. A few days later, my mother contacted me, her voice eerily serene. "Mason, we need to talk," she remarked. "About what?" Still fuming over Caleb and Avery, I inquired. "This weekend, we're having dinner at the house. Riley and you should come. It's time to put this behind us." I believed I had misheard her. Move past this? Logan was deceived by Avery. His heart was broken by her. Additionally, Caleb. She gently interrupted me, saying, "I know it's hard, but Caleb is still your brother. Despite his error, he is now content. Isn't that the important thing?" I couldn't speak. My mother, who was meant to defend us all equally, was once again taking Caleb's side. Riley rolled her eyes as I told her about the dinner. "Are you serious?" She is attempting to ignore this. Normal. I didn't disagree. Nevertheless, I felt compelled to leave, not for my mother or Caleb, but for Logan. I wanted him to know that he still had support. I was afraid of what I would discover when I arrived at my parents' house on Saturday. Riley was already there, crossing her arms as she sat on the porch. She said, "This is going to be a disaster," as I approached. I refrained from arguing. Caleb sat at the dining table as we entered, smiling as if he hadn't just split the family in two. Avery was also present, sitting next to him as if she were a part of the group. At the head of the table, our mother, Linda, was grinning as though nothing was amiss. "Come sit," she offered with a cheerful tone. "We're going to have a nice family dinner." Riley glanced at me as I gazed at her. I thought I may suffocate since the tension in the air was so heavy. However, as soon as I sat down, the catastrophe started. I was not interested in sitting at the table. To be honest, I wanted to just walk away and flip the fucking thing over. Riley and I had to speak for Logan because he wasn't present. Caleb needed to be called out. What everyone else was too cowardly to say had to be said. With a display of food so spotless that it seemed as though my mother, Linda, believed cooking could clean up this catastrophe, she stood at the head of the dinner table. She was grinning, bringing joy into the space as if she could make it material. Linda said, "Let's just sit down, eat, and talk." Riley whispered to herself, "I'd rather eat glass." As I glanced at her, Avery and Caleb were seated at the far end of the table. The sight of them together still made my blood boil. Avery. As if they were on a freaking date, Caleb had one arm thrown languidly over the back of her chair. However, Avery refused to look at Riley or at me. She continued to look at her dish with her head down, as though the mashed potatoes were the most amazing thing she had ever seen. I inquired, "Where's Logan?" I was surprised at how piercing my voice sounded. I got one of Linda's stoic "you're ruining this" expressions. "Logan decided not to come." Riley answered, "Yeah, no kidding," while crossing her arms. "Wonder why?" Linda gave her a stern look but remained silent. She probably knew Riley wouldn't give up. Riley has always been the firecracker among us. Even though she is only 2 years my junior, she has never shied away from speaking her mind, particularly when it comes to Caleb. Caleb, who was buttering a roll as if he hadn't just exploded a nuclear bomb in our family, caught my attention. "So, Caleb," I replied, "you're just okay with all of this?" He gave me his angry, calm down face as he gazed up at me. God, I detested that expression. Since we were young, he had been giving it to me as if he were superior, smarter, and older. He questioned, "What do you mean by this, Mason?" "This." I waved my hand at him and Avery and snapped. "Caleb, Logan's fiancé, was taken by you. The same Logan who asked you to be his best man because he trusted you enough. With this, are you kidding me?" With a heavy sigh, Caleb put down his butter knife, acting as though I was the one who was being unreasonable. "Look, Mason, this wasn't planned by Avery and me, and I know it's complicated. It just happened. Things just happened." Riley leaned forward in her chair and scoffed. "Is that your justification? You don't just happen to start dating your brother's fiancé?" Riley's comments made Caleb cringe, but he didn't raise his head. I was hoping she would stand up for herself and say something, but she just sat there and let Caleb speak. At last, displaying his aggravation, Caleb combed through his hair. "I won't just sit here and watch the two of you attack us. I have been open and honest with Avery. We're content together and don't require your blessing." "Honest?" I fired back. "You believe your treatment of Logan was sincere? You lacked the courage to tell him directly. Avery had to inform him when she decided to call off the wedding. That's enough." Across the table, Linda's voice could be heard. Mom gave me that familiar scowl of disapproval, the same one Mom used to talk back to me when I was a child. "We are not going to spend this dinner yelling at each other like children." Riley pushed her dish away and said, "Then maybe Caleb shouldn't have acted like one." Linda replied, "Riley, please," in a strained voice. "This isn't beneficial. The reason Caleb and Avery are here is to continue their family's journey. We must all extend forgiveness and move on from this." "Forgive and let this go?" Unable to believe what I was hearing, I gazed at her. "So you're just okay with this?" Slowly, I asked. "You're okay with what Caleb did to Logan?" Linda's expression softened, as though she were addressing a young kid who was just unable to comprehend the world. "Life is complex, Mason. Despite their mistakes, people should have the opportunity to be happy." "Happy?" Riley's fist slammed on the table as she burst. "Logan is wretched, Mom. You're behaving as if none of this is important. You're here acting like a hostess like it's Thanksgiving dinner after Caleb made him feel embarrassed." With his chair scuffing the wooden floor, Caleb got to his feet. "You know what? I don't have to sit here and have my home attacked. I've finished our talk. I yelled, "Sit down," in a low, menacing voice that even surprised me. I was so tired of Caleb walking away from everything. Responsibility, consequences. Logan, you don't get to walk in here with Avery like nothing happened and then act like we're the problem. At last, Avery raised her voice, but it was tremulous and quiet. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I turned to her, and so did Riley. I questioned, my rage mixed with incredulity. Then why did it? Avery seemed to be waiting for approval before speaking as she glanced at Caleb. She inhaled deeply when he remained silent. Caleb and we started talking months ago. At first, it was innocent but... She paused. He told me things about Logan. Things that made me doubt everything. What things? Asked Riley. Avery stumbled over her words. He said Logan didn't really love me. That he was just going through the motions because he felt like he had to settle down. Caleb... I froze as everything came together. For months, Caleb had been sowing doubt in Avery's mind. That was his personality. Attractive, cunning, and self-centered. Riley responded, "You've got to be kidding me," in a disgusted tone. "You let Caleb convince you Logan didn't love you? Logan adored you, Avery. Everyone could see it." Avery winced, but Caleb moved ahead of her while speaking in a chilly tone. "We're not going to sit here and let you two attack Avery. This conversation is over." "Fine," I responded as I got to my feet. "Then I guess I'll have this conversation with Logan instead. I'm sure he'll love hearing how his own brother was working behind the scenes to sabotage his relationship." Linda began. "Mason..." But I interrupted her. I turned and left, Riley following closely after me. "Logan deserves better than this, Mom. And if you can't see that, then I don't know what to tell you." Riley released a breath that she had obviously been holding as soon as the front door closed behind us. She mumbled, "Unbelievable. Caleb's not even sorry. He believes his own lies." I didn't respond. What Avery had revealed about Caleb getting into her head and manipulating her emotions had my head spinning. This was no fortuitous romance. For some reason, Linda was ignoring the fact that Caleb had been planning this for months. Riley turned to face me as we entered her vehicle and said, "We have to tell Logan." "I know," I replied. "But I don't think this ends here." And I was correct. It didn't. Riley's engine hummed through the peaceful ride to Logan's place. She remained silent, and I did too. The identical thought was running through both of our minds. How in the heck were we going to explain this to Logan? Avery calling off the wedding was one thing, but what about knowing that Caleb had been deceiving her for months? That seemed like a completely different animal. I kind of thought Logan wouldn't respond when we arrived at his house. With the exception of the occasional text, he had remained a phantom ever since the split. However, the door slowly opened, revealing Logan staring at us with black circles under his eyes. He appeared slimmer, as if he hadn't eaten. He said, "Hey," in a low voice. "Didn't think I'd see you guys tonight." I said, "Can we come in?" After a moment of hesitation, Logan moved aside to allow us to enter. The flat appeared as worn out as he was. The curtains were drawn, his couch appeared to be his bed these days, and takeout containers were piled on the coffee table. Logan laughed without laughter when he saw that I was staring. "Yeah, I know it's a mess. Take a seat," he said, sweeping papers from the cushions and pointing to the couch. Logan remained standing, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, while Riley and I sat. He appeared protective, as though he was aware that we weren't just stopping by. "What's up?" he finally inquired, his gaze darting between us. Riley didn't hold out. "Logan, we need to tell you something about Caleb." Logan stiffened as soon as she spoke Caleb's name. His eyes widened and his jaw tensed. "I don't want to talk about him," I whispered. "You need to hear this. It's about what really happened with Avery." Her name made Logan cringe. I thought he was going to throw us out, but he sat down in the armchair across from us after letting out a trembling breath. "Fine," he replied. "Say whatever you came here to say." I didn't mince words. Despite the pain, Logan deserved to know the truth. Avery told us tonight that Caleb had been talking to her for months. He told her things that made her believe you didn't really love her. At first, Logan's expression remained unchanged. He remained motionless as he gazed at me. He gently averted his gaze and squeezed his fists against his thighs, but I wasn't even positive he had heard me. He spoke the words. "So Caleb convinced her to leave me," in a whispery tone. "Manipulated her," said Riley again. He played with her head. "Logan," she stated. "She thought you were just settling for her because Caleb got in her ear." Logan gave a sour laugh, but it was devoid of humor. "Of course he did. That's Caleb. He's always been good at taking things that don't belong to him. I was astonished by the hostility in his voice. Logan has consistently maintained our family's composure. Logan is the quiet anchor if Riley is the firework, and I am the middle child who is always caught in the between. He is not angry. He simply becomes depressed. Now though, he now had an angry expression. He's done this before, Logan stated abruptly as he looked at the ground. Riley said, "What do you mean?" Logan's expression darkened as he looked up. "Do you honestly believe that this is the first time Caleb has taken anything that was rightfully mine? Do you recall my senior school soccer tryout?" Logan inquired. While attempting to piece things together, I scowled and said, "Yeah, you didn't make the team." "No, I did," Logan said with a sour smile. Caleb persuaded the coach that he would be a better option and that I was unreliable, even though I made the squad. It took me years to find out. While Caleb made varsity, I was dismissed. "What?" Riley's eyes widened. "Why didn't you say anything, Logan?" "Because nobody would have believed me," he shrugged, adding, "Caleb has always been the one. The golden boy is Caleb. Caleb is impervious to error." After hearing this, something clicked in my mind. Caleb had been our mother's world for years, charming, ambitious, and self-assured, everything an ideal oldest son should be. However, now that the cracks were showing, it became clear that he didn't just take things because he wanted them. He did it to win, to show that he was superior to the rest of us. "Logan," I continued slowly, "what do you suppose caused him to do this to Avery now?" Logan gave me a dumbfounded look and said, "Because he could. I've always made Caleb envious. It's not over. He does a good job of hiding it. Like he's taken everything else, I believe he decided to take away Avery after realizing how happy I was with her." Logan was right. This wasn't just about Avery. It was about Caleb needing to repeatedly demonstrate that he was the best, regardless of who he injured along the way. There was a brief period of silence. Riley appeared to want to punch a wall, and I felt sick to my stomach. Logan wiped his face and said, "You know what's the worst? I cherished her. I cherished her dearly. I also had faith in Caleb. I assumed he was pleased with me." I muttered, "I'm sorry," since I had no idea what else to say and it seemed so hollow. "You don't have to apologize to me," Logan said, shaking his head. "Please let me know what you plan to do about it." Riley grimaced. "What are you saying?" Logan's voice was harsh as he stated, "I mean, Caleb isn't done? You think he's simply going to stop after this? Mom is already on his side. I'm the bad one for not letting it go, but he'll keep making things up until the rest of the family forgives him. He acts in that manner." Riley and I looked at each other, and Logan was right. I hate to say it, but our mother was already setting the stage for us to go over this, and if we didn't do something, Caleb would win, as he usually does. Riley stated, "Mom needs to see what's going on, so we need to talk to her. She cannot continue to stand up for him." "Good luck with that," said Logan, snorting. "Until the day she passes away, Mom will stand up for Caleb. Your time is being wasted." Linda had always made excuses for Caleb, perhaps because he was the firstborn or because he reminded her of herself, but whatever the reason, she had been ignoring Caleb's behavior for years, and it had finally come to this point. I didn't want to believe that, but I knew deep down that Logan wasn't wrong. One thing was clear to me as I watched my younger brother sit in his damaged apartment though: Caleb was not going to get away with this time. I firmly stated, "This time, we're not going to let him win." After giving me a long look, Logan nodded and said, "Good. Because I'm tired of being a punching bag for Caleb." I sensed a change in myself as Riley and I left Logan's apartment that evening. I was done being kind, done letting Caleb bully everyone while Linda applauded him, and it was time to face Caleb head on. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. Riley and I quickly decided what needed to happen next. Caleb needed to be confronted, really confronted, and not just about Avery. This was about everything that Caleb had been doing for years, including manipulating people, twisting circumstances, and making himself appear like the ideal son while ignoring the rest of us. Logan was correct. Caleb wouldn't stop unless he was forced to, and we were going to force him. When Riley and I unexpectedly arrived at our parents' house the following morning, Linda opened the door, looking astonished to see us and as though she had been up all night worrying. To be honest, good. Her grin was forced. "Mason, Riley," she continued. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk to Caleb," I said as I walked into the living room, sweeping past her. Linda groaned deeply as she shut the door, and Riley trailed behind me. "This again? Can't you just," she asked, her voice already worn out. Riley interrupted, turning to stare at her saying, "No, Mom. We can't." Is Caleb present? I inquired. He's upstairs, but I don't know why you, Linda said after hesitating, then nodded. Perfect, I murmured as I made my way up the stairs. Linda called after me and said, Mason, don't start anything. Linda had let Caleb for too long, and it was time for someone to do what she wouldn't do, so I disregarded her. I didn't care what Linda thought at this point. Caleb was sitting on his bed with his laptop open when Riley and I marched up the stairs and down the hallway to his old bedroom. The door was half open, so we didn't bother knocking, and I pushed it open. His face twisted into a mixture of smugness and annoyance when he looked up and saw us. To whom am I due this distinction? Here to lecture me some more? Caleb replied, leaning back against the wall and shutting his laptop. I crossed my arms and remarked, We're here for answers, not to lecture you. I've already explained everything, Caleb said, rolling his eyes. I didn't plan this with Avery, it just happened. Why aren't you all able to accept that and go on? Because it's a lie, Riley said. Avery told us that you had been peeping into her head for months. You were ruining her friendship with Logan the entire time, Caleb. Even as Caleb's face reddened, his arrogant look persisted. So? What? Relationships are always ending. Logan's inability to retain her is not my fault. You think this is a game, don't you? I said, stiffening my fists at my sides as I walked toward him. You're not even sorry for what you did. Why would I? Logan was never right for Avery, Caleb retorted. I was kind to her. You took her. Riley screamed. You can't stand seeing other people happy, so you tricked her into leaving Logan. Watch it, Riley, Caleb said as he got to his feet, his face changing to a more icy one. You have no idea what you're discussing. I answered softly. Oh, we know precisely what we're talking about. Caleb, you've been doing this for years. Stealing what belongs to Logan, undermining him, and claiming to be the golden child while the rest of us suffer as a result. You're being dramatic. Caleb grinned. Am I? Logan told us about the soccer team, how you persuaded the coach to cut him so you could take his place. I shot back. Does that sound familiar? For a brief moment Caleb's grin wavered, but he immediately got back to it. That was years ago. Who gives a damn? Logan is concerned. Just like you ruined this, you ruined that for him, Riley yelled. Caleb chuckled, but it was a mocking, bitter laugh. You guys are unbelievable, he said. Do you believe that I am the bad guy? Logan is pitiful, he was and always has been. He allows others to walk all over him because he is weak. Avery chose me because I'm superior to him. I didn't steal her. Riley stepped forward and poked a finger at Caleb's chest, saying, You're not better than anyone, Caleb. Even though I could feel my fury boiling. The only reason you get away with being a manipulator and a liar is because Mom allows it. Caleb snarled. Leave Mom out of this. Why? Riley retorted. We all know you're her favorite. No matter what you do, she will stand up for you. Linda suddenly materialized in the doorway. What's happening in here? With a strong voice, she demanded. Riley turned to stare at her and added, Ask your perfect son. Adding that he had recently confessed to coercing Avery into leaving Logan. Linda turned to face Caleb as her face went white. Is that true? Of course not. Caleb answered softly, his voice flowing. Mom, they're misrepresenting what I said. I didn't do it. You claimed that Avery picked you because you're superior to Logan, Riley yelled. Linda's expression was unreadable as she turned to face Caleb, who gave her a wide, naive look, as he often did when he had to get out of trouble. Come on, Mom, you are familiar with me, I would never act in such a manner. For a while, I hoped that Linda would finally recognize Caleb for who he truly was, but she hesitated, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. Then, as usual, she folded. Her voice was tense as she replied, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. We're not going to solve anything by yelling. Riley laughed bitterly and said, It's unbelievable. You continue to protect him. I'm not defending anyone, Linda responded. But I'm not going to let this family fall apart over a relationship that didn't work out. This family already is falling apart, I whispered quietly. And it's because of Caleb. Caleb looked bored and shrugged, saying, Cry about it. I finished our talk. Riley snapped, No. We're done with you. What is the intended meaning of that? Caleb narrowed his brows and asked. I said, Logan's done. It means we're not letting you win this time. Riley is finished. I am too. You're by yourself. You can't just cut me out of the family, Caleb said, looking truly shaken for the first time. Watch us, replied Riley icily. Mom, you can act like Caleb is flawless all you want, But the rest of us aren't playing along anymore, I said, turning to Linda, who appeared stunned. Either you're with us or you're with him. You make the decision. Linda gave me a slap-like look and said, "You can't ask me to choose." Riley remarked softly, "You simply aren't aware that you've already made your decision." I believe that Caleb recognized that he had finally lost control and pushed himself too far, since he didn't say anything as we were leaving, and for once, he didn't have a smug response or a lazy shrug. I was relieved as Riley and I left the house because, although Caleb might not be facing actual repercussions today, he would eventually, people like him usually do, and I wasn't going to be there to catch him when he fell for the first time. After that altercation, we didn't hear from either Caleb or Linda for a few days. To be honest, I believe they were both waiting for us to return, as we always did, especially with Linda. In our family, things had always gone like this. Caleb made a mistake, Mom covered it up, and the rest of us had to keep our mouths shut for the sake of keeping the peace, but not this time. You have no idea how long I felt like I was screaming into a void, I added, and Logan actually appeared glad when we told him about what had transpired at the home. It's about time, he muttered, shaking his head. Riley and I had made our decision. Linda made several attempts to contact us over the course of the following week, first by phone and then by text, but each message was the same. Family doesn't behave like this, so we need to communicate. Caleb is your brother, and while I understand your anger, this has gone too far. You don't fully comprehend the story. Let's discuss this over dinner. We chose to ignore her. Riley, Logan, and I were all on the same page for the first time, and it felt liberating. Caleb was no longer our responsibility, so we didn't have to comply if Linda wanted to hold on to him. Caleb wasn't finished though. On a Thursday night, I received a call from an unknown number. I don't typically accept such, but for some reason, I decided to answer. "Hello, Mason." I remained silent for a moment, almost expecting Caleb to knock on my door, but I was still taken aback when I heard his voice. It sounded desperate, not cocky or arrogant. "What are you looking for?" With a flat voice I asked. Caleb hurriedly continued. "I need to talk to you. It's important." "Hard pass." His voice trembled. "Mason, please." And I was shocked because Caleb demanded things instead of asking for them. I answered, against my better judgment. "All right. Don't talk on the phone. In an hour, meet me at the depot, please." I didn't want to attend, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. The depot was an old diner we used to frequent as kids, and it felt strangely symbolic, as if Caleb was trying to exploit some shared history to guilt me into listening. I didn't recognize Caleb for a moment when I entered the depot an hour later and saw him sitting at a booth in the corner. He had bags under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days, and his normally flawless hair was unkempt. "Caleb, what do you want?" I questioned, slipping into the seat across from him. He didn't immediately respond, instead looking down at the table with his fingers tapping nervously. "I messed up," he finally stated in a hushed voice. With a sour laugh, I said, "Yeah, no kidding." "No, Mason, I made a huge mistake, more than you thought." I had never seen Caleb this afraid, and there was something about the way he said it that made the hair on the back of my neck rise up. "What are you discussing?" I inquired. After inhaling deeply, Caleb shakily exhaled. "I'm in trouble. Bad luck." I saw panic for the first time in his eyes as he glanced up at me. "What sort of issue?" With quivering fingers, Caleb ran a hand through his hair and nodded. Debt. I owe a lot of people a lot of money. Mason, I made an effort to correct it, but it got out of hand. His voice broke as he trailed off. Avery. What are you saying? I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. I think I've never seen Caleb seem so embarrassed as he looked at me. "I needed money," he said. I reasoned that by getting to know Avery better, I might be able to persuade her to assist me. Her family is wealthy, so I reasoned that perhaps. "You made use of her?" Startled, I cut in. "You used Avery as leverage because of your debt?" Despite his recoil, Caleb said, "I didn't intend for it to get this far. Although I didn't anticipate her leaving Logan for me, I was unable to stop it once it got going." Caleb had not simply taken Logan's fiancée because he wanted to win, he had done it out of desperation. He had played with Avery's emotions, ruined Logan's life, and split our family apart in order to hide the catastrophe he had created for himself. I gazed at him, trying to take in what he had just said. "Is Mom aware?" Quietly, I inquired. "No, and she can't," Caleb said, shaking his head. "If she learns, I'm finally able to recognize you for who you truly are." "Good," I responded sourly. "She is entitled to the truth." Caleb's voice was suddenly begging. "Please, Mason, I need your assistance. I have no other people. Aid you? I chuckled incredulously. Are you serious? After all of your actions? Caleb said. You're my brother. Family is meant to stay together. Don't you dare pull the family card, I responded. You don't get to hide behind that after what you did to Logan. Like a drowning man pleading for a life raft, Caleb gazed at me and said, Please. Without you, I am unable to resolve this. I felt nothing for Caleb for the first time in my life, no rage or hatred, just emptiness. He was no longer my brother, he was just a man who had ruined every relationship he had ever had. I got up and said, Caleb, you need help, but it won't come from me. Caleb started to disagree, but before he could say anything more, I left. Later that night, Riley, Logan, and I convened at my place, and for once, no one was shocked when I told them all Caleb had confessed. Logan said, He's always been like this. It just took him this long to fall apart. How about Mom? Should we tell her? Riley said. After giving it some serious thought, I shook my head and said, No. She's made up her mind. Let her if she wants to think Caleb is flawless. We're done with him though, alongside her. With everything. I had spent my entire life trying to keep this family together, but now I know that sometimes you have to let things fall apart. For the first time in years, I felt free. Neither Linda nor Caleb were my burden anymore. With a small smile on his lips, Logan turned to face Riley and me and said, You think we'll be all right? Yeah, I replied with a smile. We'll be all right. And I did believe it for once. Now to the next story 6. My family always relied on me financially, but when I stopped helping, they turned me into the villain. After years of supporting my family, I was expelled and accused of being selfish. There have been other occasions over the years when I felt ignored, such as birthdays when Mark would receive the pricey presents while I received something useful like new socks or a coat, or vacations when his family had all the attention while I sat quietly on the sidelines. It didn't matter, I told myself. I assumed that was just the nature of parents. In addition, I had always been self-sufficient. I didn't require the attention or the hype. Things changed even further once Mark married Becky and had his first son, Jason. Mark was suddenly more than simply the favorite, he was the one who brought us grandchildren. Now that they could proudly call themselves grandparents, my parents were ecstatic, feeling as though their lives had been completed. Though I couldn't help but feel a little invisible in my own family, I was also pleased for him. I dismissed it though, since family helps family, as I've always told myself. This is where it all began to go south. Mark lost his job at the conclusion of the previous year. His business was among the first to close when the small retail chain he worked for began closing its sites. It was awful. I was genuinely sorry for him. I recall Becky sobbing when she called my parents, concerned about how they would make ends meet on her meager part-time bakery salary. They were devastated to lose Mark's paycheck since, shocking as it may seem, he wasn't the best with money. However, my parents' solution was to ask him, Becky, and their 2 children to move in with them rather than helping him come up with a practical strategy to get back on his feet. It may seem acceptable on paper. Family stays together through difficult times, and they have room. The space they so kindly offered was mine, and that was the problem. It took place on a Sunday evening. I had just returned from a lengthy work trip, fatigued, and all I wanted was a bed and a shower. I sensed something was wrong the moment I went through the door. At the kitchen table, my parents were waiting for me. Dad was silent as usual, tinkering with his watch, and Mom had her typical worried expression. Sarah, honey, we need to talk, Mom remarked. Suddenly tense, I sat down after dropping my bag beside the door. Mother didn't mince words. You know how hard things have been for your brother since he lost his job. He's got Becky and the kids to worry about, and they really don't have anywhere else to go. My heart sank. I could already see where this was going. Even though I knew the answer before I spoke, I nevertheless inquired, so where are they going to stay? Mom's smile was as if she had practiced it 100 times. The basement suite is perfect for them. It's separate from the main house, so they'll have their privacy. Becky and the kids will be comfortable there. I glanced at her, attempting to take it all in. Wait, my basement suite? Where am I supposed to go? Dad spoke up at last, although in a hushed tone. We've set up the hobby room for you. It's cozy. You'll have plenty of space. What I was hearing was unbelievable. It was a glorified closet, the hobby room. It housed Mom's sewing machine, containers of seasonal decorations, half-finished projects, and stacks of fabric. It wasn't a bedroom at all. In the hopes that this was some strange prank, I asked, You're kidding, right? Mom became defensive in her tone. It's only temporary, Sarah. Besides, this is our house, and we need to make decisions that benefit the family as a whole. You'll be fine in the hobby room for now. It was the old-fashioned statement. It's our house. I sat there in startled silence as the talk came to a close, and my parents congratulated themselves on their generosity and helpfulness. I was not a big argue. What was the purpose? I didn't like it, but Mark was moving in. Neither my comfort nor my space mattered. That evening, I packed up my laptop, clothes, and toiletries. I gazed at my tiny suite in the basement, which I had turned into my home in recent years. It was mine, even though it wasn't flawless. I had my favorite scented candles, comfortable blankets on the couch, and bookshelves full of literature. It was all being torn away from me now to make room for Mark and his family. They didn't even ask, which was the worst part. It was determined for me, as if my opinions were completely irrelevant, and there was no discussion, no family gathering, and no, "Sarah, how do you feel about this?" Not in the hobby room, not in a house where I was obviously only a supporting part in someone else's story. I knew by the next morning that I couldn't stay. I therefore devised a strategy. I reserved a reasonably priced all-inclusive resort in the Florida Keys for the 2 weeks I had off in between job trips. It wasn't elegant, but it was less expensive than buying food and paying $1,600 for a property I no longer even lived in. It also included calm and tranquility, two things I really needed. My parents seemed uninterested in my plan when I informed them about it. The actual turmoil didn't start until I left, even though Mom responded, "Well, if that's what you need to do." My phone buzzed 2 days into my vacation at the resort. It was Mom's message. "Mom. Hey Sarah, where's the money for rent and groceries this month? We're counting on it to help support Mark and the kids." Speechless, I gazed at the letter. She couldn't be serious, surely. When I gave her a call back, we had a conversation that went something like this. "Mom, I don't live there anymore. Why would I pay rent?" "Because we're still a family, Sarah. You know we're all in a bind right now, and Mark needs that space more than you do. But you gave away my space, I'm not even there." At that point, Dad called, his voice firmer than normal. "You can't just leave your family hanging like this. We raised you better than that." Talking to a wall was like that. They insisted on the same thing no matter what I said. I was self-centered. I was leaving my family behind. I also had a responsibility to Mark's troubles. Then Mark called and added his voice. "Sarah, you don't understand. I have a family to take care of. You don't need the space like we do." I lost my temper. "Mark, when you had your job, did you ever send Mom and Dad money to help out?" "No, you spent it all on yourself. So why am I supposed to bail you out now?" That temporarily silenced him. I was trembling with rage by the time the call was over. I had been the one keeping everything together for years, taking care of my parents, making the payments, and being the responsible one. For what purpose? To be ejected from my personal space and accused of selfishness for standing my ground. I came to a realization at that point. This was no longer about supporting my family, it has to do with control. They betrayed me after I declined to play a part they had never asked me to play. Out of guilt, I sent Mom $400 for food, but that was all. I would no longer continue to support their lives at the price of myself. I was unaware at the time that this was only the beginning. The whole family would be rocked by my determination to defend myself, and I would never have encountered such a strong reaction. After I refused to continue paying for a place I no longer occupied, things quickly fell apart. I had no idea how far my parents and the rest of my family would go to keep me in line, even if I felt the guilt trip during that initial phone call was awful. The Florida Keys all-inclusive resort was meant to be my haven, a place where I could relax and get my mind straight. I wasn't spending $1,600 a month in a basement suite from which I had been evicted, for once. Everything I needed was there in the small bungalow I rented: good meals, a view of the pool, and most importantly, tranquility. It was like a taste of freedom, something I had been longing for but had not even understood. However, that tranquility was short-lived. My phone was constantly buzzing with missed calls and texts on the third day of my visit. "Mom. Sarah, we're disappointed in you. This isn't what family does. Dad. It's not fair to leave us hanging like this. Are you only concerned with yourself, Mark?" Every communication was like a kick to the gut. It was obvious that Mark had joined my parents' campaign to wear me down since they were unrelenting. At first, I didn't respond to any of them. The texts continued, despite my assurances that I needed time and that they would ultimately stop bothering me. Then came the phone calls. Out of pure exasperation, I picked up once, only to hear Mark's voice on the other end. His tone was accusatory, as if he had practiced the question. You know what you're doing to mom and dad, right? They're struggling. The house is too expensive, and now they're trying to help me and my family. You're making it worse by leaving. I don't get how you can be so selfish. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Selfish? I asked again, attempting to remain composed. You took my space, Mark. I'm not even living there anymore. Why would I keep paying for something I don't have? It's not about space, Sarah. It's about family. I have kids to think about, and you don't. You should be helping out more, not running away. Its daring was astounding. Here was my brother, who had mismanaged his finances for years, telling me that I owed him money to support his children. I ended the call. At the time, that was the only answer I could come up with. I was beginning to feel like I couldn't get out at the end of the week. Even though my parents lived in Riverside, 1,000 miles away, their comments followed me everywhere. There was a new message waiting for me each time I looked at my phone. The tone fluctuated, at times expressing rage, guilt, or an odd mix of the two. Mom. Sarah, think of Jason and the kids. They're just little boys. Do you really want them to suffer because you're being stubborn? Dad. You owe it to us. We took care of you when you were younger, now it's your turn. Mark. You'll regret this when the kids remember how their aunt turned her back on them. Nor were the texts the only thing. My extended family became interested. I began receiving calls from relatives I hardly knew, Uncle Gary, Aunt Linda, and others I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda? Sarah. Honey, she said on a single call. I'm sure you don't mean to upset your parents like this. They've done so much for you. Can't you just help a little longer? Mark really needs it right now. I felt like screaming. Bitterly, I thought, a little longer? What was the slightly longer duration? 1 more month? A year? Forever? I had been paying more than my fair share for years, but nobody seemed to care. The day following my return from the Keys was the last straw. I was in the middle of unpacking when my little Columbus apartment was knocked on. My parents were standing there when I opened it. With a heavy folder gripped in her hands, Mom appeared worn out but resolute. Although his presence loomed like a silent threat, Dad remained mute as usual. Stunned, I said, Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Mom exclaimed, we need to talk, as she walked into the living room, sweeping by me. I was forced to let them in after Dad pursued her. As if they owned the place, they took a seat on my couch. Mom began laying out documents on the coffee table after opening the folder. I knew right away what they were: supermarket receipts, repair estimates, and utility bills. Sarah, she said, we can't do this without you. Look at these expenses. The mortgage is still due, the roof needs repairs before winter, and Mark's kids need school supplies. We need your help. Stunned, I gazed at her. I'm not living there anymore. Why should I pay for any of this? Dad yelled. Because you're part of this family. At last. Family sticks together when times are tough. You don't just run off because things get hard. I could feel my anger erupting. You didn't ask me, Dad. You didn't ask how I felt about giving up my space. You just decided for me, and now you want me to keep paying for it? That's insane. Even if Mom's tone softened, the manipulation was obvious. Honey, think of Jason and Liam. They don't understand why their aunt isn't helping. We just want to keep this family together. For me, that was the turning point. This had nothing to do with groceries, the mortgage, or even Mark's children. Control was at issue here. I was always supposed to be the good girl, the responsible daughter who would keep everything running smoothly, according to my parents. And they had no idea how to respond now that I wasn't complying. I got up and gestured to the door. I think you should go. Mom's eyes got big. Sarah. No, I cut in. I'm serious. You need to go. Dad appeared truly astonished for the first time. They never expected me to resist, I believe. Mom remarked, we're just trying to do what's best for the family, as they walked slowly to the door. I didn't answer. I locked the door after they had left. Then I sat trembling on the couch. My family's expectations, my personal wants, the years I'd spent being the good daughter, and the covert sacrifice of my financial independence so they could live comfortably were all on my mind as I lay awake that night. I realized then that I had been facilitating this scenario for years. They became reliant on me as soon as I began making money. They expected more from me the more I contributed. Mark's poor life management was not my fault, and I had no obligation to correct it. However, liberation was not going to be simple. I told my parents to back off, but they weren't going to do it. I would have to battle for my life if I wanted it back. At that point, I decided. I would continue to assist them when I could, but I would no longer allow them to dictate how I behaved. If I didn't live in the house, I wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't feel bad about refusing to pay Mark's mortgage or his children's school supplies. I texted Mom one final time the following morning. I can't continue to pay for everything, even though I love you. I'm not an ATM, but I'll assist when I can. Please be mindful of that. In less than an hour, the response was received. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us, Sarah. We're family. I didn't respond. I felt like I was regaining control of my life for the first time in years. I foolishly believed that I had seen the worst of it, that perhaps, just perhaps, they would give me some breathing room after my parents' surprise visit and the onslaught of guilt-tripping texts. I was mistaken. In my family, it turns out that advocating for yourself is the same as declaring war. It creates a full-fledged tsunami rather than simply a ripple. The next stage of this conflict was a virtual family gathering, where everyone with a phone and an opinion had a front-row ticket to my crucifixion, in typical Evans family manner. An email was the first step. Mom. Sarah, we've scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at 3 p.m. It's important. Your aunts, uncles, and cousins will be there, please don't miss it. Of all the passive-aggressive things I had ever read, that please, was it? A meeting with the entire family? It was unbelievable to me. Was it really their intention to humiliate me by gathering the whole extended family? Did they believe that I might be fixed in some way by a mass ambush? I nearly forgot to log in. I considered completely disregarding it and letting them all shout into space, but I knew deep down that doing so would only serve to strengthen their story. Sarah's avoiding us because she knows she's wrong. I therefore set an alarm for 2:55 p.m., with a terrible feeling in my stomach, and joined the video conference. My parents, brother Mark, Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, cousin Rachel, and a few more relatives who only ever showed up at weddings and Christmas dinners were all present when the screen loaded. I glanced at the squares on the screen, and I could tell from the reticent looks that I was going to be put to the death. The first person to speak was Mom, and she wasted no time in doing so. Her voice was filled with fake concern, as if I were a lost child rather than an adult who dared to put herself first. Sarah, we're all here because we're concerned about you and the decisions you've been making lately. I remained quiet as they planned their speech. The next 30 minutes were a haze of guilt-tripping and accusations from all sides of the screen. Aunt Linda's response. Sarah, we're all family here. You can't just turn your back when people are struggling. Mark and the kids need support right now. We all pitch in when times are tough. Uncle Gary says, your parents have done everything for you. Now, when it's your turn to step up, you're acting like it's too much to ask. Family comes first. Aunt Rachel. I want to be independent, but you don't just cut off your family. That's not how we were raised. Naturally, Mark then added his voice. Do you know how hard it is for Becky and me right now? The kids don't understand why their aunt suddenly doesn't care about them. Jason asked me the other day why you don't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell him? It was a powerful blow. Although I adore my nephews, Mark was well aware of his actions. He was using them as a weapon against me, manipulating the circumstances to paint me as a cold-blooded monster. After what seemed like hours, they finally gave me the opportunity to speak. Despite my trembling palms, I inhaled deeply and unmuted myself. Look, I remarked, attempting to maintain a steady tone. I love this family. I do. And I've been helping for years. Paying rent, paying for groceries, doing whatever I could to keep things running. But this is too much. Mom's expression tightened, but I persisted. I'm not living at home anymore. You gave my space away without even asking me, and now you're expecting me to keep paying for it. That's not fair. You're all acting like I'm abandoning you, but I'm just trying to take care of myself for once. There was silence in the room. I wasn't done yet, but I could see Mom shaking her head and getting ready to respond. Mark, I uttered while looking straight at his video square. You're my brother, and I care about you, but you've never been responsible with your money. When you had a job, did you send money to Mom and Dad to help out? No, you spent it on yourself. And now, when you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not bailing you out. Despite his hot face, Mark remained silent. I added, and the rest of you, as I turned to face my extended family. Where were you when I was the one keeping everything afloat? None of you had anything to say when I was paying $1,600 a month for a basement suite I only lived in half the time. But the second I draw a boundary, suddenly I'm selfish. The ensuing hush was deafening. Uncle Gary was frowning, Aunt Linda was scandalized, and my mother was about to cry. Dad refused to look into my eyes as he sat there with his arms folded. Mom finally said something. Sarah, we just don't understand why you're acting like this. This isn't like you. That was it. The last straw. I didn't wait for an answer before saying, this is me, Mom. I'm just not the doormat you've gotten used to. With a gratifying thump, I closed my laptop after selecting Leave Meeting. The text began right away. Mother. You didn't have to humiliate us like that. Sarah said, we were trying to have a conversation. Mark said, you've changed. I hope you're happy leaving your family behind. Aunt Linda said, I can't believe how disrespectful you were to your parents. I disregarded them all. I no longer owed them an explanation. But despite my sense of justification, I was powerless to stop the guilt from eating at me. I had always been the good girl, the responsible daughter who never got into trouble, growing up. It felt strange to stand up for myself, like if I were violating some holy family law. I sat with a glass of wine on my couch that evening and tried to take it all in. I became increasingly aware that this was about more than just money and space as I gave it more attention. It has to do with control. My family had depended on me for years, thinking I would always be compliant. They turned against me as soon as I left that position. I have no regrets about my remarks throughout the meeting. It was the first honest thing I had said to them in years, if anything. I was aware that the worst was yet to come. My family was not going to silently give up. They had only barely begun. I hoped things would settle down after the family gathering. Perhaps I was naive, but I believed that perhaps the surprise of my at last defending myself would cause them to back off, give me room, give themselves time to think. I was mistaken. My refusal to back down simply made things more heated, if anything. I felt as though I had prodded the bear, and it was now using all of its strength to claw back. Boundaries were not something my family respected. They viewed them as obstacles to be surmounted. The attempts to pull me back into the fold were blatantly intrusive, the manipulation became more daring, and the guilt trips became more acute. It took place a few days following the family gathering. My coworker Sam stopped by my office as I was finishing up a customer report. Hey, Sarah, some woman called reception asking for you and said she was your mom. She left a message with Emily, but I think you should hear it. I felt sick to my stomach. Emily gave me a sticky note while wearing a perplexed expression, and I followed him to reception. The message said, this is Sarah's mother, Nancy Evans. We're going through a difficult moment, and I need to talk to her about some pressing family issues that may be interfering with her ability to concentrate at work. Please urge her to take the initiative. Thank you. I froze, looking at the message as if it were about to burn in my palms. My mother had contacted my place of employment. My workplace, not to see how I was doing, nor because of an emergency, but to leave a note implying that I wasn't doing my share to support the family. I was embarrassed, enraged. I crumpled up the message, my face burning. Sam smiled awkwardly at me. Everything okay? I gave a rigid nod. Yeah, it's fine, just family stuff. However, it wasn't good. As soon as I got home that night, I called my mother. Why would you call my work, Mom? That's completely out of line. She sounded angry, as if I were the one who was being unfair. I had to get your attention somehow. You're not listening to us, Sarah. Maybe hearing it from someone at work will help you see how serious this is. What I was hearing was unbelievable. My work has nothing to do with you or Mark or your bills. You can't drag my professional life into this. Mom didn't think twice. We're your family. We come first. You need to start acting like it. No, I firmly answered. I don't. I need you to respect my boundaries, and I need you to leave my job out of this. Limits? She laughed. This isn't about boundaries, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. You're abandoning us and you don't even see it. I ended the call. Arguments were pointless. Nothing I said would convince my mother to change her story because she was so engrossed in it. When I woke up the following day, I was inundated with alerts. I knew who it was without even looking at my phone. My brother Mark had indeed made a Facebook post. His initial post was ambiguous, just enough to evoke pity without providing specifics. Mark Evans. You discover your true family during difficult times. When it's inconvenient for them, some people lose track of their origins. Even though we're trying our hardest, it's difficult when some folks refuse to help. The comments came flooding in. Mark, keep going, you're capable. Family is the most important thing. One day, whoever is disappointing you will come to repent it. Toxic people are not necessary in your life. Pay attention to your lovely family. But the best part was when Mark himself sent out a direct message. Mark. Jason is constantly inquiring as to why you no longer come. Are you okay with me telling him that his aunt doesn't give a damn about him? I sat there looking at my phone, feeling both angry and sad. Knowing how much I loved Mark's children, I detested the way he used them as a weapon against me. However, I was also aware that this was typical Mark behavior: play the victim, elicit pity, and paint me as the bad guy. I declined to respond. I refused to play his game. My parents were bound to try something different eventually. It was to be anticipated. I was enjoying some rare quiet time that Saturday morning while drinking coffee when someone knocked on my door. As I looked through the peephole, my heart fell. There they were, Dad and Mom, standing on my porch, Mom holding a manila envelope. I contemplated not responding. I knew they wouldn't go, but I might have acted as though I wasn't home. I inhaled deeply before opening the door. I said, "What are you doing here?" Without even waiting for an invitation, Mom took action. Dad followed her as she pushed past me. As though they owned the place, they took a seat on my couch, and Mom took out the folder. "We need to talk about finances," she continued, laying out receipts and bills on my coffee table. I gave my temples a rub. "Mom, we've been through this? I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore." With a stern voice, Dad said, "Sarah, you don't understand. We're struggling. Mark's struggling. The roof needs to be fixed before winter, and there are school fees for Jason and Liam. It's not just about you." I exploded. "It's always about me, Dad. It's about what I can give, what I can pay for, what sacrifices I can make to keep everyone else comfortable. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not responsible for Mark's problems. We're not asking for much, Sarah. Just $2,000 a month to help with the basics. Is that really so unreasonable?" Mom shot back, her voice cracking. Stunned, I gazed at her. "You think $2,000 a month is not much? Are you hearing yourself right now?" From there, the discussion took a turn for the worse. They always responded with blame and guilt whenever I attempted to defend my position. "After everything we've done for you, family is supposed to help each other. Mark has kids to think about. Sarah, you don't understand because you're single." I had finally had enough. I got up and gestured toward the door. "You need to leave." Mom looked at me as if I had given her a slap. "Sarah." They gathered their belongings and departed, slamming the door behind them, but Dad murmured something under his breath now. I collapsed onto the couch once they were gone, feeling as though I had just finished a marathon. My chest felt constricted, and my head was thumping. I kept thinking about the dispute, my dad's disappointment, my mom's tears, and how I felt like I was failing them. But I knew in my heart that I wasn't. I was simply worn out. I'm sick of having to make repairs all the time. I'm fed up with being the good daughter who gave up everything for different people. I was in a trance for the remainder of the day, oscillating between melancholy and anger. I was starting to feel the effects of the pressure, guilt, and relentless manipulation. I understood for the first time that this was more than a passing dispute. Unless I broke it, this loop would continue indefinitely. I vowed to myself as I laid in bed that night, I would not allow them to pull me back in. I would not back down no matter how much they tried to guilt me or how hard they pushed me. Stopping being their crotch was something I owed to myself. But they weren't finished yet, as I would soon discover. By no means. Upon my parents' unexpected arrival and their ridiculous demand for $2,000 per month, I believed I had seen every trick in the book. I believed I was at last ready for their guilt trips and emotional blackmail. I convinced myself that if I stood my ground, they would back off. Those who thrive on control, however, have a tendency to persevere. They get more intense. The following week felt like a pressure cooker. In little time at all, my parents quickly spread the word about their egotistical daughter leaving them when they needed her most. It wasn't until I began receiving calls and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years that I realized how far they had gone. First, it was my Uncle Gary once more, who always managed to keep the peace in the family. "Uncle Gary," he said. "Sarah, your mom called me crying. She's heartbroken about everything that's happening. I get that you're upset, but can't you just compromise a little? Family is more important than pride." I tightened my jaw as I gazed at my phone. How did pride enter into this? Was it prideful to spend half the month living out of a suitcase and not want to pay someone else's mortgage? My cousin Rachel, who enjoys pushing her nose where it doesn't belong, then sent me a note. "Rachel, I don't mean to be impolite, but this is a little ridiculous. Are you simply allowing your brother and his children to suffer, Sarah? It's chilly. I didn't believe you were that way." Whatever the truth, my parents had created their own version of events, making me the bad guy, the one who had deserted her family, the one who was more concerned with money than her sad brother and his helpless kids, and they made me the black sheep overnight, and it worked. Naturally, My brother Mark seized the opportunity to stoke the fires, posting more frequently and sharply on social media. Some people say they care about family, but when times get tough, they're nowhere to be found, Mark wrote on Facebook. Even if it means bearing this burden alone, I'll stop at nothing to ensure my children are happy. My phone buzzed with a notice from a group chat that my cousins and I were sharing, and I chose to ignore it until Rachel shared a screenshot of Mark's most recent message, adding, "Yikes, he's talking about you, isn't he?" His friends and random acquaintances flooded the comments with sympathy and encouragement, but no one knew the truth, and Mark didn't care. The humiliation was unbearable to me. Mark knew exactly what he was doing, portraying himself as the father who never gives up, the struggling hero, and me as the cold-hearted, self-centered sister who refused to help. My mother crossed another line just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. On Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of a conference call when my employer, Tom, knocked on my office door. Tom was uneasy. "May I speak with you for a moment, Sarah?" Dread gripped my gut as I nodded and muted my phone, and Tom shut the door behind him and took a seat across from me. "Your mom called the office again," he added with care. "She didn't speak to me directly, but she left a message with reception." My face flushed with shame. "I'm really sorry. I'll take care of it." "It's okay," Tom said, raising his hand. "Family matters come up. I wanted to make sure that everything was well. Please let me know if you require time off for whatever reason." I answered sharply, "There's nothing going on." And I detested the fact that my mother had brought my work life into her mess. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again," I continued. My work was the one place I'd managed to keep apart from my family's craziness, and now she was invading it too. Tom nodded and walked away, but the damage was done. I felt ashamed and remained at my desk for a long time, staring blankly at my computer screen. How did she? My parents were trying harder, my brother was using his children as weapons, and the rest of the family had taken sides. By the end of the week, I was emotionally spent. The texts, phone calls, and gossip felt unrelenting, and I couldn't go a day without someone attempting to manipulate or guilt-trip me back into submission. I had just finished cleaning my apartment on a Saturday afternoon when I heard a knock on the door. I knew immediately who it was without even looking through the peephole, so I opened it to find Mark standing there with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. This was the last straw. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I inquired. He didn't waste time making small talk. "Sarah, we must speak. This has continued for too long." I stopped the doorway by crossing my arms. "No, Mark, there's no need for conversation. You must go." He raised his voice and screamed, "You don't get to just walk away from your family." Jason and Liam couldn't comprehend why their aunt no longer cared about them. "Mom and Dad are losing their hearts because of you. You're shattering mine." Something broke inside of me. "I'm not the one who left, Mark. You did that because you believed that I owed you something simply because I put in more effort and made wiser decisions, and that I should clean up your mess. I finished carrying you." For once, Mark had no rebuttal and appeared astonished, as if no one had ever spoken to him in that manner. "Go home, Mark," I murmured softly. "Nurse your own family. I'm finished." When I heard his footsteps departing, I felt a wave of tiredness slam over me. I stood there trembling for a second, half expecting him to knock again or yell through the door, but he didn't. My family wasn't just requesting assistance, they felt entitled to it. My money, my time, my life, and when I dared to refuse, they made it their mission to punish me for it. I sat on my couch that night and stared at the wall, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months, including the eviction from my basement suite, the incessant guilt trips, the invasion of my workplace, and the lies Mark spread online. At that moment, I understood that I had two options. I could either walk away from this losing war or continue to fight it. One of the few people who had supported me during this ordeal was my buddy Jessica, whom I called the following morning. "Jess, I'm moving," I declared. "Where are you moving?" "I'm not sure yet. Outside the state. A long way off. I require a new beginning." Without hesitation, Jessica said, "Good. You're worthy. Sarah, do it for you." I put the pieces in motion over the course of the following 2 weeks, applying for a job transfer within my organization and beginning my search for apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city I had always wanted to visit because it was close enough to provide me with space without making me feel like I was running away. I placed a brief letter on the kitchen table at my previous residence on the day I packed up my car and left Columbus, but I kept it a secret from both Mark and my parents. "I can't continue living this way, even though I love you. One day, I hope you'll understand. I don't know if they ever will." As I drove down the highway toward Charlotte, I experienced a strange range of emotions, including relief, anger for the way my family treated me, and grief for the family I had to leave behind. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from obligations that weren't mine, free from guilt, and free to start over. The kilometers behind me made it clear to me that I was choosing myself, and for once, that was sufficient rather than fleeing. Now to the next story. 7. My parents sued me for cutting off contact and tried to drag me back into their drama. Their manipulation led to a court battle. I got my friend's sister pregnant, but she lied about it. My parents disowned me, but now that they know the truth, they are pleading with me. Okay, so here's the thing. I need to get this off my chest because my life became a total wreck around a year ago. Let me begin at the beginning because, believe me, this is one of those situations where you're just like, seriously, what the hell? I never imagined that I'd be here sharing this on Reddit, but I suppose that's what happens when your family goes crazy and you're left standing there, wondering, how did this even happen? My friend Dave has a sister named Jenny. Both of them have been in my life for years. It's nothing big, is it? We all grew up in the same area and occasionally hang out. Jenny was never quite like the others. I don't mean to come across as cruel, but she was dealing with some mental health issues. To be honest, it wasn't my business, and I don't know all the specifics. Everyone knew Jenny struggled, but Dave never mentioned it much and I didn't ask. In any case, Jenny unexpectedly called me a year ago to tell me she was pregnant. All okay, that's cool. With the exception of one little detail, she claims that I am the father. I swear my brain just short-circuited at that very instant. I thought, wait, what? Now, let me be quite clear, I have never, ever hugged Jenny, much less had an intimate relationship with her. I was therefore unable to even comprehend her making such a ridiculous claim against me. I told her straight away, Jenny, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's no way I'm the father. We've never been close like that. However, she simply repeated it repeatedly, as if I were going to magically recall a night that never occurred. To put it mildly, it was strange. Though I was secretly freaking out, I attempted to remain composed, thinking perhaps this was a result of her mental health issues or something. This is the point at which things start to go wrong. A prenatal paternity test is something Jenny declines to take. She refused to move, even though I was sitting there thinking, if you're so sure it's my kid, why wouldn't you just take the test and prove it? It was a guilt trip city, and I wasn't buying it when she said things like, you need to be there for your child, and, you're abandoning us before the baby's even been born. I therefore made it plain that I would not sign anything if she chose not to take the test. I had no intention of legally binding myself to a child that wasn't mine. Easy, isn't it? That should be the end of it, I thought. I was mistaken, boy. The familial drama begins. My parents found out a few weeks later. My parents have this whole traditional values thing going on, and the moment they learn about the issue, they lose it, like, totally lose it. I still love them though. I'm just standing there trying to speak, but they're not listening, and they're calling me names and calling me a shame and a deadbeat. They wouldn't listen to me when I informed them, Mom, Dad, this isn't my kid. Jenny's just making stuff up. They couldn't seem to get rid of the idea that I was the one who brought this baby into the world. After that, there were many ugly arguments. To be honest, I'm still upset about things that were said that I probably can't take back. Despite my repeated assurances that it wasn't my child, my parents persisted in pressuring me to act morally and become a father. They didn't care about it. They saw me as already guilty. They stated they couldn't believe I would refuse my own child and that they didn't raise me to be a deadbeat. I was not even in the same state when Jenny would have become pregnant, which makes the situation even more bizarre. Yes, she allegedly became pregnant while spending a whole month at a friend's house. My parents dismissed this when I brought it up to them. People make mistakes, they stated. Yes, this was more than a simple error. This was a serious charge that might destroy my life. At this point, Jenny is approximately 6 months along in her pregnancy. The entire family has now turned against me. Every phone contact, text message, and family meal revolves around the idea that I must mature and assume responsibility for this child. I was going crazy. I felt as though I was in a bad dream, and no matter what I did or said, no one took me seriously. Fortunately, most of my friends supported me, but even a few of them began to have doubts. For example, are you sure, man? Maybe you don't remember something. My parents finally gave me the ultimatum. They're casting me out of their lives, disowning me, and kicking me to the curb if I don't take charge and behave like a father. They were dead serious, despite my initial belief that they were bluffing. They made it clear to me that I would no longer be accepted in the family if I didn't comply. Indeed, they disowned me after I refused to give in. That hurt, let me tell you. I was angry, perplexed, and simply hurt. They decided to believe someone else over me, even though they were the ones who reared me and were meant to support me. I was thrown out by my own family as if I didn't exist. It was cruel. After the baby was born, things became even more bizarre. Playing the part of a proud grandmother, my mother was present at the hospital. It wasn't until later that I found out. I had to deal with some legal issues to get the paternity test completed because Jenny was still refusing to do it. Guess what happened when the results were in? Not my child. I had no possibility of becoming the father. And I had a simultaneous feeling of relief and rage as soon as I held the paper in my hands. Finally, they'll see the truth. They'll realize they were wrong, and everything will go back to normal. That was my thought when I sent my parents the results. Instead, they began bombarding my phone with requests for forgiveness, money offers, and apologies. In an attempt to make things better, my dad even mailed me several $100s. The problem is that I retained the money. Yes, I did accept it. After everything they had to do to me, I felt like I owed them. But pardon them? I made it plain that I would not expose myself to such treachery again if they were prepared to disown me for such a thing. I understand, I truly do. While the majority of my friends supported me, others, along with my therapist, began to say things like, maybe you should give them another chance. They're your parents after all. However, how can you simply forgive someone who was willing to discard you so readily? When someone believes a falsehood about their own child, how can you trust them? I'm currently caught between the belief that I did nothing wrong and the question of whether I should even make an effort to mend my family's relationship. I can't get rid of the sensation that they let me down when I needed them the most, though, because every time I think about it, I recall how fast they betrayed me. Okay, so you would think that things would settle down after the drama involving Jenny's kid and my parents, wouldn't they? Not at all. My life had different ideas. If anything, the situation continued to get worse. You would think it would have ended with me proving I wasn't the father, but wow, I wish it had been that easy. It turns out that people would do anything to avoid accepting responsibility if they don't want to acknowledge that they made a mistake. I therefore thought, okay, now my parents will realize they were wrong, and maybe things can get back to normal, after the paternity test results showed that I wasn't the father. However, rather than providing the solace I had hoped for, things became much more problematic. To begin with, Jenny went totally crazy. She began circulating the area with tales that I had interfered with the test in some way or had fabricated it. Yes, you read correctly. She believed that I had somehow persuaded an entire laboratory to falsify the results to support my claims. I mean, how could I possibly do that? I'm not a genius who can rig DNA testing. I'm simply an ordinary guy. Jenny, however, was not listening. She was determined to paint me as the antagonist in her tale. She went around claiming that I had deceived everyone into believing I wasn't the father and that I was leaving her and the child. It didn't matter that it didn't make sense. People began to trust her. Rumors from small towns traveled quickly, and soon I was being seen as a scumbag by people at the grocery store. I even had people come right up to me and question why I wasn't taking charge of my child. It enraged me. Nobody appeared to care that I had the test results to show that I wasn't the father. I was being held responsible for something I had nothing to do with, while Jenny was out there acting like the victim. Never in my life have I felt so powerless. Being betrayed by your family is one thing, but what about when everyone in the community believes you are the villain? That has a distinct sound. What about my parents? They were still making an effort to be polite, but it was obvious that they were also at a loss for how to respond to the scenario. My mother kept phoning and leaving heartfelt, lengthy voicemails expressing her desire for her family to reunite. She wanted to brush everything under the rug, as if nothing had ever happened, and didn't even discuss what had transpired. She even invited me over for dinner, as if it would suddenly undo all the harm they had caused. It was offensive in addition to being awkward. They believed that a few family meals and some forced grins would make everything okay after what they had to do to me. Like they didn't even grasp how much trust they had broken, they just said, let's move on. There was no apology or recognition of how severely they had messed up. And that's the problem. Trust cannot be restored with a hug and a dinner once it has been shattered in that way. Rebuilding requires a lot of labor and effort, and they weren't even prepared to acknowledge their mistakes. The worst part was when my father attempted to buy me off. He simply emailed me to offer to buy me a new automobile if I returned to the family. As in, what? Did they believe they could simply buy my pardon? I wasn't even sure how to react because it was so disconnected from reality. For a long time, I just gazed at the email, trying to determine whether it was a cruel joke. My dad was serious though. I didn't answer, I was unable to. How can you respond to such a thing? Correctly repairing things was not important to them. Simply because it was convenient for them, they wanted me back in their life. And I became aware of how little they truly understood what they had done when they believed that hurling money at me would make everything better. The worst aspect, however, was discovering later that Jenny had begun contacting people I knew in an attempt to include them in her drama. She even tried to persuade Samantha, my ex-girlfriend, that I was this awful person who had left his child behind. After years of not communicating, Sam suddenly texted me, saying, "We need to talk." I didn't know what she was talking about at first, but when she revealed that Jenny had been attempting to rekindle old drama by contacting her, I nearly lost it. I told Jenny to cease over the phone. I wasn't going to allow her to include my friends and ex-partners in her mess. I was done with the lies and the games. However, she simply hung up after laughing. Talking to a wall was like that. Nothing I said would reach her since she was so engrossed in her fantasy world. By now, I was thinking about hiring a lawyer quite seriously. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. I felt like I had no one on my side while Jenny was out there damaging my reputation and my parents were supporting her actions. Yes, I had the support of my closest friends, but even they were unaware of how awful things had gotten. At some point, I had to decide. I couldn't continue to wait for the next insane claim or rumor to surface, living in a condition of continual tension. I made the decision to sever all connections, not just with Jenny but also with my parents. It wasn't simple, in fact, it was awful. However, I realized I couldn't allow them to continue to bring me down. I sent my parents a lengthy email outlining my feelings of betrayal, my failure to trust them, and my inability to trust them going forward. Nothing was sugar-coated by me. I was honest with them, telling them that I wasn't ready to forgive them and that I wasn't sure if I would ever be. I advised them to start by sincerely apologizing and accepting responsibility for their conduct if they want to have any chance of a future relationship with me. No more acting as though nothing was wrong. There's no more ignoring issues. Regarding Jenny, I blocked her on all platforms. Her machinations were becoming too much for me to handle. I wasn't going to allow her to continue entangling me in her mess since she wasn't my concern. I even had to inform her brother Dave that I would not be able to spend some time with his family. Dave has always been a great buddy, so that was difficult, but I had to prioritize my own health. I took them off a few months ago, and to be honest, I've been relieved. Even if I occasionally feel bad or question my decision, I know that ultimately I made the right choice. Even though it's difficult, there are moments when you have to leave. It's messy and convoluted, to be sure, but at least I'm not always watching for the next catastrophe to occur. At last, I'm able to breathe. But man, I never would have believed you if you had told me a year ago that this is where I would wind up. I suppose that's just the way life is. First update. Okay, so this is where it gets even stranger. I believed that the pandemonium would be resolved if I severed my relationship with Jenny and my parents. I reasoned that if I cut them out of my life, everything would settle down and I could move on. Naturally, however, things are not so simple. Terminating them? And that was only the start of a whole new problem. A few weeks after blocking Jenny and sending the email to my parents, I received an unexpected contact from Mike, an old acquaintance from high school. He suddenly asked how I was doing, even though we hadn't spoken in years. Okay, that's random, I thought at first, but then he informed me that my parents contacted him. In the past, Mike and I weren't even that close, so why would my parents get in touch with him? That was a serious warning sign. It seems that they had been attempting to persuade others to speak with me on their behalf. I'm speaking of longtime acquaintances, distant family members, and even folks I don't really know. They were telling everyone that they were concerned about me and that I was in a horrible position. They seemed to be attempting to paint me as the unstable one. What's the worst? They were presenting the entire situation as though I should have apologized for interrupting them. Mike didn't mind. He wanted to alert me because he knew something was wrong, but it went beyond that. I began receiving messages from a wide range of people over the course of the following few days, including some I had just met a few times and others I hadn't spoken to in years. It was crazy, everything they were saying was the same. Your parents are really worried about you. Or, you should give them another chance. Somehow, they had persuaded everyone that I was the villain in this scenario, that I had lost my mind and had to make amends. It was unbelievable to me. My parents were out here waging a full-fledged public relations campaign to paint me as the villain while I was simply trying to move on with my life. I had the impression that I was in a strange parallel dimension where nothing made sense. I tried to avoid the drama as much as possible, but it kept coming back to me. When they contacted my employer, it was the last straw. You heard correctly, My parents gave my workplace a call. I'm not even sure how they obtained the number, but they managed to locate my boss's phone number and called the office to inform him that I wasn't feeling well. How embarrassing must that have been? One day, with a serious expression on his face, my employer took me into his office and asked me how things were at home. I was taken aback. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. When your boss asks if your parents believe you've lost your mind, what do you say? Fortunately, he was really understanding when I told him the whole issue. Even if he expressed regret for bringing it up, the damage had already been done, guy. My own parents were now attempting to interfere with my work. They seemed intent on ruining everything for me simply because I refused to comply with their demands. Then there was nothing I could do. To obtain a restraining order against them, I went to a lawyer and began the process. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. They were interfering with my friends, my career, and my mental health. Even if it meant officially cutting them off, I had to defend myself. The procedure was drawn out and tense. Along with the paperwork and court dates, there was a great deal of tension. However, I also experienced a strange sense of relaxation. I felt like I was finally taking charge of the matter. I will no longer allow them to take over every aspect of my life. No more allowing them to control the story. Naturally, chaos ensued when they learned about the restraining order. In a lengthy, guilt-ridden email, my mother told me how she never thought her own son would act in this way and that family should always remain united. She said that I was the source of all the suffering and that I was destroying the family. I didn't bite, but it was textbook manipulation. I didn't answer. It grew worse before it got better, though I wish I could say that was the end of it. One day, my car was vandalized when I got home from work. The word liar had been keyed into its side by someone. I didn't have any evidence that it was my parents, but really, who else could it be? Other than a few close friends, I hadn't disclosed the restraining order to anyone. The only people with an incentive to do such a thing were my parents. They had to strike out in any way they could since it seemed like they couldn't lose control. I reported it to the police, but it was never resolved. Another reminder that sometimes the ones who should love you the most can become your worst adversaries, even if you attempt to do things the right way. In order to be safe, I then began parking my car at a friend's house. I have to stop taking chances. In case they tried something similar, I even put security cameras around my apartment. I had the impression that I was constantly on edge, waiting for anything to happen. But after a while, things began to settle down. After the restraining order was granted, my parents were prohibited from getting in touch with me or visiting my house or place of employment. My shoulders were greatly relieved. I was able to breathe for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. Even after several months, I'm still getting my bearings. I had to explain the entire scenario to my friends and coworkers and make sure they understood the truth, which required a lot of damage control. While some were doubtful, the majority were supportive. Do you honestly think your folks would go that far? I understand. It's difficult to accept. You understand, however, how far some individuals will go when they feel like they're losing control since you've been there yourself. In retrospect, I never thought things would become this terrible. It's amazing how easily a family may turn against you if you don't follow their rules. All of this has taught me one vital lesson, though. You cannot allow anyone, not even your family, to dictate how you live your life. Even if it hurts, there are times when you have to make the difficult decision to leave. I have no idea what the future holds for my parents and me. Perhaps they will come to their senses and truly apologize. Perhaps not. In any case, I'm done allowing them to rule my life. I'm not looking back. I have my own road to follow. Second update. Okay, so this is when things start to change. I assumed things would finally calm down when I obtained the restraining order and began attempting to start over. Unexpectedly, however, life had other ideas. My folks found a new method to play tricks on me just when I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. It wasn't direct contact this time. It wasn't sending emails or damaging my car. No, this was messed up on a completely different level. I'm sitting at home one day, taking care of nothing, when I receive a letter in the mail. That's not too strange, is it? This letter, however, came from a lawyer. I initially assumed it had to do with the restraining order, possibly some last-minute paperwork or something. However, no. A lawsuit was filed. For what, you ask? My own parents were suing me. Suffering on an emotional level. I was reading something that I couldn't even believe. They were actually suing me for interrupting them, claiming they were entitled to compensation since my actions had seriously damaged their mental well-being. They went so far as to say that I had cut them off from the rest of the family, which was absurd because it was they who isolated me, not the other way around. For a good 5 minutes, I just sat there and stared at the letter, trying to take in the situation. Who, after all, does that? Because they are upset over being cut off, who sues their own child? I was at a loss for what to do. There was a part of me that was extremely worried out, and another part of me wanted to chuckle at how absurd it all was. This was legal now, and it was going to get really unpleasant. It was no longer just a family drama. I immediately called my attorney. This was too much for me to do alone. I was as surprised as she was. She had witnessed many unpleasant family issues, but bringing a lawsuit against your own child for emotional distress? Even for her, that was novel. We discussed the lawsuit's specifics, and even though most of it was obviously false, I felt we couldn't ignore it. Since they were sincere, I had to defend myself. The weeks that followed were filled with stress, phone calls, and meetings. The findings of the paternity test, the restraining order, and the harassment I had been experiencing were all pieces of proof I needed to collect. It felt unreal that it had come to this, even though my lawyer was sure we could win. When I refused to allow my parents to dominate me anymore, they tried to drag me through the mud in court. The problem is that they went beyond the case. Unfortunately, they had to go farther. In an attempt to turn other family members against me, they began contacting them. I began receiving messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, including aunts, uncles, and cousins. "Why can't you just make peace with your parents?" was what they were all saying. "You're acting self-centered." They seemed to have been indoctrinated to believe that I was the bad guy in this whole situation. I was incensed about the entire scenario, not just my parents. It seemed like they always managed to change the story and paint me as the villain, regardless of what I did or how hard I tried to defend myself. Because you set limits, your parents are suing you for emotional distress. How can you convey that to someone who is only hearing one side of the story? I eventually had to cut off even more individuals because of it. I unfriended people on social media, blocked family members, and generally cut off any ties to that aspect of my life. I couldn't keep defending myself to people who had already made up their minds, not because I didn't care about them, I did. It was tiring, and I had had enough of defending my choices to those who refused to consider the wider picture. The court date eventually arrived. I arrived with my attorney, ready for whatever bullshit they would hurl at me. And it was a circus, I tell you. My parents had a full sob story prepared about how they had always supported me, how they had attempted to help me get through difficult times, and how I had rudely interrupted them without cause. Since they were the ones who initially disowned me, it was quite amazing how they portrayed themselves as the victims in all of this. But it didn't sit well with my lawyer. She dissected their claims in detail, presenting the judge with all of the proof of their harassment, including the paternity test and the restraining order. By the end of it, you could tell the court wasn't buying their story, and it was awful. The judge gave me a favorable ruling. In the end, it was a minor success because the lawsuit was obviously dismissed and my parents were compelled to pay my legal bills. It didn't feel like a victory, though, even though I did win. There was still a lot of aftermath to cope with, and it seemed like I had just left a nightmare. My parents made a last-ditch attempt to reintegrate into my life following the case. They wrote me this lengthy, heartfelt letter in which they expressed their regret for everything, their desire to put things right, and their inability to stand the thought of losing me. To be honest, I didn't even answer, and it was the same old guilt-tripping rubbish they had been doing from the beginning. I had already decided that I would not return. A person can only endure so much until they are forced to leave permanently. Indeed, it was painful. No matter how terrible things become, it's not simple to cut off your family. However, there are situations when it's essential for your own mental health. No matter how much they pretended to love me, I couldn't allow them to continue entangling me in their mess. I refused to let their poisonous form of love to continue to contaminate my life. That's where I am at the moment. I'm moving on, the restraining order is still in effect, and the case is behind me. Although it hasn't been simple, I'm learning to live without the commotion and the never-ending worry about when the next catastrophe will strike. It feels pretty damn wonderful to feel like I have some control over my life for the first time in a long time. I have no idea what the future will bring. Perhaps things will change in the future. They might not. But for now, I'm concentrating on taking care of myself and repairing the aspects of my life that they attempted to destroy. Though it has taken a while, I am beginning to glimpse the end of the tunnel. Third update. Okay, so if you've been following along, you would think that the restraining order and the legal issue would put an end to the chaos. However, no. My family managed to give me a final surprise. To be honest, this one made me shake my head since I didn't believe they could go any lower. However, here we are. The situation had finally begun to settle down a few months following the court's decision in my favor. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I was able to concentrate on starting again after severing my connections with everyone who was stressing me out. No letters from lawyers, no sporadic communications from old friends, just quiet. At least that's what I believed. I ran into my cousin Melissa one day while out on errands, doing routine tasks like grocery shopping. Now, throughout all of this drama, Melissa and I hadn't spoken much. Although we were never particularly close as children, we always got along. I decided to say hello to her when I spotted her. We ended up talking for a while, and initially it was just your typical conversation, catching up on work, life, and other things. She suddenly interrupts me, though, saying, "Hey, did you hear what your parents are planning?" I went cold. "Are you planning?" I asked, experiencing that old pit in my gut all of a sudden. Melissa sighed and continued, although she appeared a little uneasy, as if she wasn't sure if she should even tell me. "Yes, next month there will be a large family reunion. It seems that they have been telling everyone that they hope you and them will be able to reconcile." It was unbelievable to me. They were actually preparing an ambush reunion in an attempt to reintegrate me into the family. They were inviting everyone, including distant relatives, family friends, and individuals I hadn't seen in years, Melissa revealed when I asked for more information. What's the kicker? They had been pretending that I was aware of the entire situation and informing everyone that I would be present. I was enraged. They had made me out to be the villain if I didn't turn up, even though I hadn't agreed to anything. My parents' standard tactic was to control the issue, paint me as the bad guy, and attempt to guilt-trip me into complying with their wishes. I told Melissa up front that I wasn't going, and I thanked her for informing me. Even she appeared somewhat conflicted, as if she were falling for my parents' "we just want to fix things" line of reasoning. She wanted me to go and put things right, and I could see it in her expression. However, I was not going to fall into that trap after everything they had done. That evening, I went home and gave it a lot of thought. I felt compelled to say something even though I knew I wouldn't be attending the reunion. Since I couldn't ignore this, I made the decision to send my parents a final email outlining everything in detail. I sat down and sent them an email the following morning. It was brief but straightforward. I informed them that I was aware of the reunion and that I would not be attending. I made it plain that I didn't want to participate in any coerced reconciliation, certainly not in front of a large group of people. I advised them to respect my limits first if they were sincere about making things right. And there was nothing else to discuss until they were able to accomplish it. To be honest, I didn't need a response and didn't anticipate one. This was the last time I needed to correct the record. Naturally, though, my parents were unable to ignore it. My dad phoned me a few days later. He left a lengthy, meandering voicemail about how I was destroying the family and how this reunion was meant to be a new beginning for everyone, but I didn't answer. He even said, "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in how you're handling this," in an attempt to put me under guilt. That voicemail really got to me. It made me think of all the times my parents had manipulated me and used guilt to get what they wanted, not because I believed it. They would use any tactic they could to make me feel like the issue, even if it meant bringing up my grandparents, who, incidentally, had always been there for me. They were unable to acknowledge that perhaps, just possibly, they were the ones who needed to examine themselves closely. I left the voicemail unanswered. What was the purpose? I was not going to allow them to drag me back into their drama after I had finished speaking. However, it continued to bother me for days after that. I thought I was simply refusing to make peace, and I kept thinking about the reunion and all the family who would be present. I questioned how many of them were receiving the distorted version my parents were giving them, and how many of them truly understood the whole story. In the aftermath of the reunion, I never heard from my parents again. On Facebook, I came across pictures of joyful grins, family embraces, and other such scenes. My parents were grinning and behaving as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just spent the last year attempting to ruin my life. Seeing them act as though everything was flawless was strange. However, I suppose they were always skilled at acting. Melissa informed me the reunion had been unpleasant when I saw her again a few weeks later. It seems that many people were expecting me to arrive, and some awkward talks ensued when I didn't. According to Melissa, my parents' attempts to explain my absence were not well received. Some family members even began to wonder why I wasn't present and why my parents hadn't been more forthright about the whole thing. After all, I suppose not everyone believed their story. And I suppose that's the current situation. Even though I've been able to put the drama behind me, I know it's always there, just beneath the surface. I've come to terms with the fact that my parents are unlikely to acknowledge their mistakes. I can't alter them, but I can safeguard myself, continue to live my life independently of them, and concentrate on the individuals who genuinely care about me. It has been a long journey, and I will admit that there are still moments when it hurts. It's difficult to cut off relatives, and sometimes I question whether I made the right decision. But I knew in my heart that I had to. They kept attempting to pull me into a toxic loop, but I had to choose me, my future, and my mental health. That concludes this crazy journey. Things may or may not change in the future. In any case, I'm tired of allowing my family to dictate how I live. Now that I have my own road to follow, I'm doing it on my own terms for the first time in a long time. Now to the next story 8. My wife disappeared after a girls' trip, and now she's trying to manipulate her way back into my life, acting like nothing ever happened. It's common to hear statements like, "I never saw it coming." That's precisely how it went for me, though. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed that we were in agreement, and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that we both desired children. Or I believe that we both did. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly express her desire for 2 or 3 children, rambling on about the names we would give them, the nursery decor, and everything else. She would even spend time on the internet planning our future children's lives while perusing baby gear and clothing. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. We were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together, and everything appeared to be going according to plan. But after that, we received some terrible news, which really devastated me. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. I felt worthless. Our entire set of plans vanished in a flash. I was hit hard, terribly hard, by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that it didn't matter and that she would be content with us alone. However, there was something strange about the way she said it right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was all about starting a family one minute, and then she claimed she didn't need children to be content. I understand that people change their ideas, but her entire demeanor seemed strange to me. From thinking about baby names, she had completely stopped talking about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never mentioned before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself, that I should work out, or that I should be more productive around the house. Yes, I could have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. She was different from the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely doing the part. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a pattern where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. I never really believed her when she said, "As long as we're together, I'm happy." She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. Suddenly, she informs me she wants to take a girls' trip. Now, traveling with her buddies was nothing out of the ordinary. She had previously done it a few times, and I had always encouraged her. For a long, she talked about wanting to travel to America with her pals, while we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I found it a little strange that she would say that because I hadn't done anything particularly noteworthy, but she appeared so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know she had landed because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but no one picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, when morning arrived, I still hadn't heard from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. In the hopes that something had gone wrong with her phone or that she just hadn't had time to check in, I even went so far as to call her companions, who were meant to be traveling with her. However, they were also perplexed when I called them. They did not accompany her on the trip. Back at home, they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It truly hit me at that point. She wasn't traveling with any girls. She didn't have any friends. She hadn't accompanied anyone anywhere. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I made an effort to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a connecting flight or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her expressing "thank you for being so supportive" and the entire girls' trip were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up, as if I were living in a nightmare. I had never married a woman like this. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see, that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text, anything. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. After packing her bags, she disappeared. The promises I had given myself the previous evening, maybe she was late, or perhaps her phone died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. It was as though I had been a stranger to her all along and had been left to work things out on my own without knowing what had gone wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. What went wrong was a question I kept asking myself. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. It may sound dramatic, but I was completely preoccupied with figuring it out. It seemed as though the solution would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People took notice. When they inquired about my well-being, I would just dismiss it by claiming that I was occupied with personal matters. Admitting the truth, the fact that my wife abandoned me without saying a word, was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still ponder about her, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her around, even when I was with them. The incessant inquiries from strangers, including neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former co-workers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. It was like pulling out a new scab each time somebody asked, "How's married life treating you?" And "How's your wife?" I would just smile and tell them that everything was good since I lacked the courage to tell them she had left. But each time I repeated that untruth, it felt more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. In order to talk to someone who was impartial and unfamiliar with our baggage, I contacted a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she would not have remained here if it had been a magical moment. It wasn't my fault. She made the decision to go. It was a difficult pill to take. I had the feeling that I was flawed and had somehow alienated her for a long time. However, I gradually began to see things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I had persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't hurt. As time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. But now that I had so much free time, I was at a loss for what to do. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. I was hardly keeping up with my job at first, simply going through the motions. However, when I began to feel more like myself, I worked harder at my job. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all, the extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I'd tried to forget would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having folks by my side who weren't involved in the mess and who could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I had invested much too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the conclusion of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had at last begun to seem normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when everything I did was somehow related to her. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be pleased to see her. I thought I was past caring, so yes, that really got to me. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I remained silent. I just stared as I stood there. As if nothing had happened, she gave me a smile before asking, "May I come in?" The nerve. Really, I mean it. She just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and told her, "No, you can stay right there," explaining that I didn't want her in my home bringing all that commotion back into the one area I had created for myself. Despite her rather disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and simply launched into her story. She began by saying, "I know this might be a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." Her expression was hopeful, as though she truly thought I would be willing to listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her, not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Our second opportunity? As if this child were some sort of magical reset button that would allow us to resume where we left off. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by adding that although she had made a grave error, we could now start over, just the three of us. She wanted us to be a family once more. "Why did you leave?" was the final question that had been bothering me ever since she appeared. I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she had left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just nod and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and had suddenly come to the realization that she wanted me back. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. She was here, confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, had his child, and now expected me to accept it. As if I should simply forget and forgive. "So you left, found someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened?" I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized, admitting that she had made a big mistake, but I remained unmoved. She kept talking about how she knew she was supposed to be with me and that I was the one she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so crazy that I was shocked. I could see it clearly on her face that this was desperation, not love. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. "Who does she think I am?" was all I could think about. I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her right away, "You made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here." She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no, as if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a surge of relief as it seemed like her true self was revealing itself in front of me. At last, I was recognizing her true self. I refrained from arguing with her. I didn't speak louder. "We're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore." I simply replied, looking at her, and then I closed the door in her face, interrupting her if she had any more words to say. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, cry, knock, or do anything else. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. This stranger who believed she could pick up the pieces when it was convenient for her took the place of the lady I had loved and married. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it after I shut the door behind her. I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. However, no. Rather, she began pounding on the door while shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine, the only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. I opened the door just enough to let her know I was paying attention, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I was unable to contain myself at that moment. I laughed, really laughed, because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. I said to her, "You left. You had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm not just going to pretend none of that happened because you feel like it." Her face flushed, and she began to talk about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had discovered her error too late. "You don't understand how hard it was for me," she said. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. That's when she lost it. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped doing the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of being unjust and lacking the grace to give her another chance. If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own, she bravely said. I simply stood in awe. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me. As if she was worthy of praise for not being as awful as she could have been. I replied, "So, what am I supposed to be grateful for? Grateful that you only ditched me and didn't take my stuff with you?" Her expression was a mixture of rage and something more, possibly desperation or guilt, as she gazed at me. But to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been dragging about had finally been removed when I met her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay, here she was, the one who ruined everything we owned. She became even louder and continued to complain about how I had made her leave in the first place when she realized I wasn't going to back down. She said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I straight up told her, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your exit." To that, she had nothing to say. Simply looked at me as if I had hit her. However, I prevented her from speaking. I said, "You made that choice all on your own, and now you've got to live with it. That's not my problem." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. She literally exploited the child in her arms to make me feel guilty, as if I were the villain in this situation. However, I wasn't buying into it. I replied, "I don't know that child. I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine and neither are you." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind, and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I also didn't wait for her to rap on it again this time. In my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I felt like I had finally won as I moved away from the door. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know? It was pleasant. I experienced an odd sense of tranquility as soon as I shut that door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the effort I had put into her over the years, all of the sorrow, the shame, and the never-ending wondering, had simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, everything was truly finished, but naturally, it wasn't as tidy a conclusion as I had planned. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a kind person, she had been quite helpful to me when her daughter departed, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in response," and didn't say anything further. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, was not involved at all. He had bailed out. She was left to figure things out on her own because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me, and I nearly didn't respond. He was direct but courteous. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and suggested that I might be able to assist them in some way. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little, not aloud, but you get the idea, when he began to talk endlessly about how his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Before I know it, her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone to make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to finally realize that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life felt peaceful and typical. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food, and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval, for once. I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. Occasionally, I would stumble into someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened to her?" I would respond with a succinct, courteous response and shift the topic. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Occasionally, people I don't often communicate with would message me to let me know that she was seeking assistance from anyone who would listen. Some of them even implied that she hoped I would reconsider, that perhaps I would change my mind and end up playing dad to her child. However, that was not going to occur. I had already invested too much time and effort into rebuilding my life to consider taking that route. Her safety net was not going to be me. Just because things didn't go as she had hoped, I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions? And me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand dramatic sense, but simply, contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient. Now to the next story 9. My husband demanded a DNA test moments after I gave birth, but he underestimated what I'd do to protect my daughter and our legacy. The words that just came out of my husband's mouth are far worse than the pain that rips through me like a sharp blade. Adam comes forward, his pricey suit immaculately ironed despite the 12 hours we've spent in this delivery room, while I'm still gasping for air, trembling and drenched in sweat. He says, "I want a DNA test," in a flat, impersonal voice that sounds like he's ordering coffee rather than asking about our baby daughter's paternity. With her hand still holding our baby, my baby, the nurse freezes. The beeping monitors suddenly become too loud and obtrusive, and the room appears to shrink. Dr. Collins's wrinkled face wrinkles in worry as he looks up from his charts. My voice sounds odd and aloof, as if it were someone else's. Adam, what are you talking about? I ask. He refuses to look at me. Rather, he looks at our 7-pound daughter. 4 ounces of excellence, with calculating coldness. You heard me, McKenna. I want proof she's mine. Like poison gas, the accusation lingers in the air. This is the result of 12 years of marriage. To make him feel even a small portion of the agony pulsing through my chest, I want to shout and throw something. Rather, I chuckle. It's an unpleasant sound, bitter and nasty. Get out. The words make my tongue taste like metal. Get out before I call security. Dr. Collins begins, Mrs. Harrison. But Adam interrupts. He takes out his phone and runs his fingers across the screen, saying, I have every right to be here and every right to request this test. My lawyer says. Your lawyer? You've been talking to your lawyer while I was in labor? I blurt out. The only indication that he is still capable of feeling guilt is a faint flush that appears on his neck. I've been preparing for this moment for weeks. The word keeps repeating in my mind. Weeks. My husband was organizing this ambush as I was folding little onesies and choosing nursery colors. I feel as though I've been physically struck by the understanding. Bless the nurse, she puts herself in our way. Sir, perhaps we should continue this discussion outside. No. I ignore my aching body's protest and push myself to sit up taller. Let him stay. Let him watch the test. Let him see exactly how wrong he is. Something flickers in Adam's eyes, but his expression remains unchanged. Disappointment? Solace? I can no longer tell. I used to be familiar with all telltale signs and micro-expressions. At what point did my husband lose his identity? I'll set it up right away, Dr. Collins states in a deliberately casual tone. Though I must say, in my 30 years of practice. Just do it, instructs Adam. I used to find his nervous habit of straightening his tie charming. The sooner we know the truth, the better. The reality. As though he still knows what that word implies. My girl, our daughter, is sleeping soundly in the bassinet, oblivious to the storm that is building all around her. Her dark hair, like mine, is already beginning to curl, and her little fingers are balled into fists. Even though my hands are shaking, I answer, fine, in a calm voice. Do the test. But when it proves what I already know, don't expect forgiveness. His phone buzzes. Adam. He looks at it and his mask briefly comes off. Fear? Feeling guilty? He's on his way to the door before I can comprehend it. He says, I'll be back tomorrow, without turning around. My lawyer will contact you about the arrangements. I can breathe again as the door snaps shut behind him. Dr. Collins touches my shoulder tenderly. McKenna, I'm so sorry. Don't. I grab my phone, fingers already locating Sam's number. I'll let my cousin know what to do. He always does. Just get me the paperwork for the test, and Dr. Collins, make sure it's witnessed every step, I respond. His eyes light up with comprehension as he nods. Of course. I gaze at my daughter once more, committing to memory every exquisite feature of her face. Adam has no idea what he's started, regardless of the game he's playing or the falsehoods he's telling himself. After 3 days in the hospital, Sam feels as though his flat is a haven. As Tara bustles around the kitchen brewing tea, I curl up with Emma on his worn leather couch. My worries are calmed by the familiar smell of coffee grounds and old books, but my hands continue to shake. Saying, he's changed all the locks, I observe Sam pacing. Changed the security codes too. 12 years of marriage, and he locks me out like I'm some kind of criminal. With his journalist's notebook already stuffed with scrawled notes, Sam stops pacing. When exactly did things start changing with Adam? Think back carefully. The inquiry is a kind of gut strike. I close my eyes and attempt to remember when my marriage started to go apart. Maybe 4 months ago. He started working late, missing doctor's appointments. Said it was a big merger, the Preston Tech deal. Tara's expression is disturbed as she puts down a mug of chamomile tea. That closed months ago. I give it a quick glance. How do you know that? Tara looks at Sam and says, because my sister works in their PR department. The deal fell through in March. March, when Adam began bringing pricey new suits home. When the enigmatic business travel started. When he completely stopped caressing me. Sam taps his pen against the notebook and says, this is what doesn't add up. Why wait until the baby was born to demand a DNA test? Why not do it during pregnancy? Because he needed a scene, states Tara in a low voice. He needed witnesses. It dawns on me like a blast of cold water. He's building a case against me. Emma stirs in my arms, and I instinctively move her blanket. Her little face reminds me of how calm and trustworthy I used to be. Reluctantly, Sam says, "There's something else. I made some calls. Adam's been meeting with divorce attorneys since January." "January," I mumble. Looking down at Emma, I caught myself saying, "When I first told him I was pregnant." When he smiled and hugged me and said everything was perfect. That son of a... Why go through with the pregnancy if he was planning this all along? Because of the Harrison family trust, Tara responds accordingly. "Your father-in-law's will had specific conditions about heirs, didn't it?" Things begin to come together. Even when I say, the trust only pays out if there are legitimate children, my voice sounds empty. He needed proof the baby wasn't his to invalidate the claim. Sam's phone is buzzing. His face darkens as he looks at it. Adam just posted on LinkedIn. He's accepted a new position at Grant Technologies. Grant. The name makes me think of something. Wait, isn't that the company that tried to buy out Harrison Industries last year? Sam concludes. The same one your father-in-law refused to sell to before he died. We all jump when someone knocks on the door. Glancing through the peephole, Tara takes a rapid step back. "It's Adam." "Don't open it," I say, holding Emma tighter. Adam's words, "McKenna," echo through the door. "I know you're in there." "The DNA test is scheduled for tomorrow morning. My lawyer insists you be present." I take Sam's arm as he approaches the door. "Wait. Let him talk." Adam goes on. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." His voice becoming almost soft. "Just come home. We can work this out." I slowly get to my feet so as not to wake Emma. "Work what out, Adam? The lies? The secret meetings? Or how about the trust fund you're trying to steal?" "Quiet. Then. I don't know what you think you know. I know enough. I no longer tremble when I say this. I know about Grant Technologies. I know about the divorce lawyers. And soon, I'll know everything else too." One more pause. The veneer of tenderness vanishes when he talks again. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Neither do you." Something hardens inside me as I gaze down at our girl, my daughter. "Game on, Adam." He backtracks along the corridor. "What's the plan?" asks Sam after locking the door and turning to face me. I take my phone out and go through my old contacts until I locate the one I need. First, we find out everything we can about Grant Technologies. And then, I answer the phone. We call in some favors. Before a recognizable voice responds, the phone rings again. "Dr. Collins, I need your help with something." With a somber expression, Dr. Collins slips the phone across his desk. "These messages were automatically backed up to the cloud account you shared. I thought you should see them." When I take up the smartphone, my hands shake. 2 days before my labor, the timestamp indicates 3:47 a.m. The message says, "Everything's arranged. Once the test results come back, she won't have any claim to the trust. Make sure you stick to the plan." Adam has responded. "She suspects nothing, just keep your father focused on the merger." "Evelyn Grant," says Dr. Collins softly, "is Marcus Grant's daughter." I find the name to be bitter. Last year, he attempted to compel my father-in-law to sell his business. With his journalistic instincts taking over, Sam leans forward. "The same Marcus Grant who mysteriously acquired 3 board seats after your father-in-law's death." I continue to scan through texts, each one getting worse. Plans. Gatherings. Personal information that makes my stomach turn. "They've been seeing each other since January," I murmur. "The same month I told him about the baby." Sam asserts, "The timing is not coincidental. Grant Technologies announced their hostile takeover bid last week. With Adam's help, they'll have controlling interest in Harrison Industries, unless there's a legitimate heir. The parts fit together perfectly. That's why he needs the DNA test. To show Emma isn't his. It's not about the baby at all. It's about the company." We are interrupted by a knock. Tara enters with a pallid face. "Adam's here, with lawyers." Even though my heart is racing, I make myself remain composed. "Let them in." Adam walks in with 2 suits that probably cost more than my yearly income, as if he owns the place. He's wearing a tie I've never seen before, and he seems different. Colder, sharper. Dr. Collins begins. "This is a private medical facility," but Adam interrupts. The elder attorney says, "My client has every right to supervise the paternity test that we're conducting. We have concerns about potential tampering." I chuckle. I'm unable to stop it. "Tampering? That's rich, coming from you." Adam clenches his jaw. "Careful, McKenna, you're already facing potential fraud charges if..." I raise the phone and ask, "If what?" If these messages somehow become public? The ones showing you and Evelyn planning to steal your father's company? He becomes motionless. I catch a glimpse of genuine terror in his eyes. You had access to my private, I go up and exclaim, your private messages on our shared cloud account, my rage giving me courage. The one you forgot to disconnect when you were so busy planning your little corporate takeover. Adam's visage darkens as the younger attorney murmurs something in his ear. He responds, this changes nothing, but his tone falters. The test will proceed exactly as planned. In a strong tone, Dr. Collins interrupts. Under my supervision, with witnesses present. Unless you'd prefer to explain to the board why you're colluding with Grant Technologies while serving as Harrison Industries CFO. Sam moves forward while Adam's hand fumbles with his phone. I wouldn't, answers Sam with ease. My article about corporate espionage at Grant Technologies goes live in an hour. Fascinating stuff about insider trading and family betrayal. Adam responds, you're bluffing, yet his forehead is dripping with perspiration. I approach while speaking quietly. You want a war, Adam? Fine. But remember, you taught me everything about corporate finance during those late-night strategy sessions. Everything. I stop and show him his most recent communication to Evelyn, which was about love and eternity. Always keep receipts. The elder lawyer clears his throat as they look at one another. Perhaps we should discuss terms. No terms, I respond, observing Adam's flawless exterior crumble. No deals. You wanted to play dirty? Let's play. But remember, you're not just fighting for money anymore. You're fighting for survival. Adam's shoulders are stiff with rage as they depart. Sam lets out a faint whistle. That was something. I sit back down and mutter. Just the beginning, as my legs feel like they might give out. Dr. Collins, how long until the test results? 24 hours, he responds, closely examining me. Are you sure about this? Once we start, I interrupt, I'm sure, in a firm voice. I look at the picture of him and my father-in-law during his medical school graduation that is on his desk. He trusted the wrong people. I won't make the same mistake. Sam gives me a shoulder squeeze. What's next? I take out my phone and navigate to a number I never would have imagined using. Next, we talk to Evelyn Grant. It's time she learned what kind of man she's really dealing with. With its sky-high steel and glass, the Grant Technologies lobby shines with riches and power. Feeling small, I shift Emma's carrier on my arm till I see my reflection in the gleaming marble. Adam got me this suit for board meetings, and it's one of his favorite suits. The armor is what counts, even though it fits differently now. The receptionist says, Miss Grant is in a meeting, without even looking up. I say, tell her McKenna Harrison is here, in a firm voice. With her fiancé's baby. Keys no longer click. Her eyes enlarge when she notices Emma's dark locks, which resemble Adam's a lot. Evelyn Grant and I are seated opposite one another in her corner office 5 minutes later. She's younger than I anticipated, and she's immaculately groomed in a way that befits careful breeding and old money. Her 3-carat princess-cut engagement ring, which is identical to the one in Adam's browsing history, catches the light. She claims, I don't understand, but her hands deceive her by twisting a pen till her knuckles turn white. Adam never mentioned a wife, a baby. Emma fusses, but I handle it with practiced ease. Funny how those details slip his mind when he's planning corporate takeovers. The color fades from her face. You can't prove. With screenshots visible, I move my phone across her desk. Actually, I can. The question is, what will your father say when he learns his perfect future son-in-law is still married? That he's using your relationship to manipulate Harrison Industries stock? Evelyn murmurs. You're lying, but she's already using her immaculately manicured finger to browse through the texts. Her expression hardens with each message. The DNA test is tomorrow, I add, observing her expression. Adam's quite confident about the results, almost like he knows something I don't. She glances up abruptly, terror and recognition flickering in her eyes. My phone is buzzing. My blood runs cold after reading Sam's text. Lab break-in last night. Security video was deleted. He wouldn't, Evelyn murmurs, more to herself than to me. Your father's company stands to gain millions if Harrison Industries falls, I say while leaning forward. And Adam stands to gain everything, unless there's a legitimate heir. She snaps the pen in her hands. Her immaculate desk calendar is marred by ink, which stains both merger dates and wedding venue appointments. Get out, she says tremblingly, before I call security. I slowly stand up, drawing Emma next to me. You know what's funny? I ask in a cool yet incisive tone. He bought me that exact same ring 5 years ago. Promised me the same forever. Even used the same pet names. She shouts, "I said get out." I quietly remark, "Check his phone," and stop at the door. The one he keeps in his gym locker. The one with the real messages. She becomes motionless. "How did you," when I say, "Because I was you once," I make my way to the door and then stop again, saying, "Young, in love, certain he was different." Oh, and Evelyn, when you confront him, watch his left eyebrow. It twitches when he lies. On her broken face, the elevator doors close. I write to Sam, my hands shaking, "It's done. Begin the second phase." He responds right away. Tara's lab contact verified attempts at tampering. The test is being moved to a secure location by Dr. Collins. Another message from an unidentified phone appears. When I open it, my heart stops. "Clever girl," writes Adam. "You can't remember who taught you how to play chess, though. Check your email from Harrison Industries. If you don't leave the board within 1 hour, the creative accounting adjustments you assisted me with last year will be made public. It's your turn." I gaze at the screen, reliving the memories of late hours spent poring over spreadsheets, following Adam's instructions, and signing documents he insisted were standard. The realization of how long he has been planning this makes my stomach turn. Emma's little hand catches my finger as she stirs. I see my own resolve, my father-in-law's strength, and something else in her face that Adam never realized was part of the Harrison family's history. I call Dr. Collins. "How quickly can you access the original audit files from last year?" In response, "Already done." "And McKenna, I found something interesting in your father-in-law's private records, something about a contingency plan." I smile for the first time in days. "Tell me everything." With its clean whiteness and security cameras monitoring our every step, the safe lab feels like a fortress. Adam's attorneys hover close by while Dr. Collins stands at the testing station, his countenance unreadable. Emma ignores the stress that permeates the room as she rests in her carrier. When Dr. Collins says, "The results will be available in 30 minutes, all parties will remain present," the door flings itself open. With mascara smearing her cheeks and her flawless poise ruined, Evelyn bursts in. I yell, "You bastard!" Adam takes a step back, his self-assured facade falling off. "Evelyn, this isn't," she spits out, "the gym locker," and throws her phone to him. It strikes the wall with a crash. "3 other women, and you're still married." The attorneys look at each other in horror. Sam stops him as he goes for his briefcase. "Until we hear those results," Sam replies softly. "Nobody leaves?" Adam's uncomfortable gesture of straightening his tie is something I had nearly forgotten. "This is ridiculous." "Whatever McKenna told you?" Evelyn interrupts him, her voice cracking. "She didn't have to tell me anything. Your friend Marcus was quite helpful once I showed him the real numbers behind the Grant Technology merger." Adam's face loses color. "You didn't?" She smiles sharply and bitterly. "Daddy's on his way with the SEC. A message from Tara says, 'Security footage recovered,' and my phone vibrates. A suspect in a lab break-in was identified." I give Dr. Collins the phone. After examining the picture, he turns to face Adam's younger attorney. The man begins to perspire. "Interesting," says Dr. Collins in a cool but acerbic tone. "Very interesting indeed." Adam looks from one of us to the other, calculating. I know the expression he gets when he's going to give up a piece to keep the game going. Adam says abruptly, "The accounting irregularities," in a loud voice. "McKenna signed off on all of them. She's just as culpable." With the exception of the backup plan, I break off, maintaining eye contact. The one my father-in-law left with Dr. Collins before he died. Adam becomes motionless. "What?" He knew Adam. About the embezzlement, about Grant Technologies. "He documented everything," I add, now speaking steadily. "Including your attempts to access Emma's trust fund before she was even born." Clearing his throat, the senior attorney does so. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps we should—" "Shut up." Adam's calmness totally breaks. His fists are clenched as he rounds on me. "You're bluffing?" "Richard trusted me," Dr. Collins adds in a low, uncompromising voice. "Not just as his doctor but as executor of his estate, including the real will." The device emits a beep. "Test findings are available." Sam stops Adam before he can get the printout. "It's over," declares Sam. "The SEC has everything, fake DNA test orders, embezzlement records, even your deals with Marcus." The hall reverberates with the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps. Adam steps back from the entrance. "McKenna," he adds as his voice mellows into that accustomed cunning tone. "We can still fix this, for Emma's sake?" I say, "Don't you dare." With words that burn like acid. "Don't you dare use our daughter as a bargaining chip." The door opens. First to arrive are two SEC agents and Marcus Grant. Tara holds out her phone behind them, documenting everything. One agent says, "Adam Harrison, you are being investigated for securities fraud." The events that follow are shown in slow motion. Adam rushes to the emergency room. The younger attorney tries to stop him. Sam shouts something about treachery. Emma is unaware of the mayhem and sleeps soundly in her carrier while it all. Dr. Collins holds out the test findings while touching my arm. "Do you want to know?" I look at the paper and go back to all the times I questioned whether Adam was telling the truth or if I had failed as a mother or a wife. I eventually respond, "No," as I see my spouse get handcuffed by SEC officers. The results don't matter anymore. She's my daughter. That's all I need to know. Marcus Grant walks up, his expression solemn. "Mrs. Harrison, we'll need your testimony tomorrow." I pull Emma in close. "Right now, I'm taking my daughter home." I hear Adam yelling my name as we head out, desperate now, realizing what he's lost. I don't turn around. Not every game is worth winning. Some successes come from letting go rather than seeking retribution. Lawyers, testimony, and struggles for control of Harrison Industries are all part of tomorrow. But I've got all I need in my arms tonight. The boardroom at Harrison Industries is cooler than I recall. After the SEC probe was made public, half of the board left, so perhaps that's why there are empty seats. Perhaps it's the way Sam avoids eye contact with me or the way Dr. Collins is constantly looking at his watch. Marcus Grant spreads paperwork across the gleaming table and declares, "The evidence is conclusive." The results of the DNA test were changed before they were sent to the lab. Adam's new attorney cuts in with a suave voice, "However, Mrs. Harrison was complicit in the financial irregularities, according to my client." Even I sound hollow when I explain, "The signature on these documents was forged. I never—" "Can you demonstrate it?" More documents are slid forward by the attorney. "The evidence from these trading records indicates otherwise. During the relevant period, there were significant transfers to your personal account." As I recognize the account numbers, my hands shake. It's our joint account, the one Adam ordered I cease keeping an eye on since he had it handled. This is absurd. Sam stands up suddenly. McKenna allegedly approved these transactions while she was on maternity leave. The lawyer has a shark-like smile. Timestamps indicate otherwise. The doctor clears his throat. Marcus Grant continues. "The contingency plan has been compromised," his words tumbling like stones. "Last night, someone gained access to Richard Harrison's personal documents. Everything is gone." The space whirls. I feel the earth move beneath me as I hold onto the edge of the table. "That's not possible. The security procedures were bypassed," the attorney states in a tone that borders on empathetic. "Using your login information and some really intriguing emails regarding offshore accounts." My phone is buzzing. I'm shivering after reading Tara's message. Emergency updates. Company stock is plunging. Reports regarding fraud at Harrison Industries' various levels are currently in the news. The DNA test fiasco is causing a lot of conjecture on social media. I can explain, but Adam's attorney raises his hand. He straightens his papers and stands up saying, "Save it for the SEC hearing." In the meantime, considering the situation, the board has called for an emergency vote of no confidence. "You can't," the words grate on my throat. My father-in-law dedicated his life to this business. He had faith in me? Believed you? Adam's voice interrupts, causing me to wince. Despite the ankle monitor indicating his house imprisonment, he stood spotless in the doorway. "As if I trusted you not to speak to Evelyn behind my back." "You dare not." With ease, he adds, "The board needs stability. Someone who can weather this storm with clean hands. Thankfully, I have a deal with the SEC that calls for complete cooperation in return for a lighter sentence. The pieces fit together perfectly. The fake signatures, the corrupted data, and the meticulously crafted paper trail that leads directly to me. You're going to blame me for everything." The realization is bitter. The cover-up, the fraud, all of it. I told Evelyn that he twitches his left eyebrow. "McKenna, you did this to yourself. If you had simply cooperated. Did you play along?" I get up so fast that my chair falls over. "While you embezzled the inheritance of my daughter? Richard built everything, but you ruined it all?" His grin turns ruthless. Regarding that, the initial results of the DNA test were really intriguing. There is silence in the room. Security personnel intervene as Sam approaches Adam. I mutter, "You're lying." But suspicion seeps in like poison. All those late hours at work, the enigmatic business trips, the way he avoided talking about nursery colors or baby names. Am I? He asks as he takes out his phone and displays a test result that I have never seen before. Do you want to know how these genetic markers work? Dr. Collins begins to say something, but Adam's attorney interrupts him. In light of the situation, my client is ready to request complete custody. When evaluating a person's suitability for parenthood, the court typically disapproves of fraud and embezzlement. The world becomes extremely small. I saw Emma's face, her dark locks, her little fingers. Her early giggles and nighttime sobs are audible to me. The only thing that has felt genuine since this nightmare started is the weight of her in my arms. Adam whispers, "In an hour, the board will vote. Sign over your shares, resign immediately, and perhaps we can set up supervised visitation." I sway and Sam takes my arm. "Don't, McKenna." My vision is blurry, though, and I'm already reaching for the resignation letter. Sometimes giving up isn't the same as surrender. Sometimes the goal is to purchase time so that you can fight in a different way. At midnight, the atmosphere in Dr. Collins' office is different. His father's medical degrees are shadowed, and our footsteps are obscured by the constant buzz of backup generators. While Tara does her magic on the computer, Sam stands guard at the door. "I found it," she murmurs. "The initial backup of the server. During the purge, Adam's crew didn't notice it. When I put in the flash drive Richard Harrison gave me years ago, his insurance policy, which I never imagined I'd need, my hands trembled." "How much time?" With her fingers gliding over the keyboard, Tara responds, 10 minutes to decrypt. If the passwords that your father-in-law used are still valid." The door slams open. Adam is standing there with 2 security officers on either side of him, his ankle monitor glaring accusingly in the dark. He replies, "I knew you'd try something desperate," as he enters and adjusts his handcuffs. "However, breaking and entering? That will appear awful during the custody hearing." Sam shifts between us. "How did you discover?" Adam's eyes do not meet his smile. "Dr. Collins isn't as devoted as you believed. Everybody has a cost. Like the cost of Evelyn, the words have a harsh taste? Or did she only serve as a stepping stone?" For a moment he loses his cool. "You're not aware of the stakes." Behind me, Tara whispers, 7 minutes. Adam narrows his gaze. "It won't matter what you're attempting to recover. Tomorrow morning, the board will cast its vote. Your resignation has already been handled." As I watch the progress meter creep, I remark, "Resignations are a funny thing. If they were signed under duress or if the person requesting them is engaging in fraud, they are not valid." He chuckles, but there's a hint of doubt. "There is nothing you can prove." 15 minutes, Tara replies. Adam gives the guards a signal. "Stop it, right now?" I move forward and play my final card, saying, "Wait. The actual DNA is the outcome. Let me see them. We have experienced this. Either show me, or I send the SEC everything we discover, including every email, transaction, and encounter with Marcus Grant." He twitches his left eyebrow. "You're playing a bluff." 3 minutes, declares Tara. The security personnel approach the PC. Sam stiffens, prepared to step in. Adam's words, "She's yours," stop everyone cold. The actual DNA test demonstrates that she is yours. I needed leverage, so I changed the outcomes. I just sense clarity, even though the admission should be painful. In any case, you never desired her, did you? She was merely another resource to manage. For 2 minutes, Tara replies. At last, Adam's facade breaks. "Do you believe this has to do with a baby? Power is at issue here. Command. All of the promises Richard made to me when he appointed me CFO," I whisper. "He promised you a legacy, not a kingdom to steal." "A minute." Adam makes a foray towards the computer. Tara shields the screen and Sam stops him. Something, a phone I've never seen before, drops out of Adam's pocket amid the confusion. I pick it up and immediately see the texts. Plans to dismantle Harrison Industries for parts, discussions with Marcus Grant, and something else, Dr. Collins' correspondence. Tara declares gleefully, "It's done. Everything has been decoded." Adam becomes motionless. "You should avoid opening that file." However, I already am. The room is filled with the voice of Richard Harrison, who made a video confession just days before he passed away. He gives names, explains plans, then offers a last surprise. Now that I finally understand, I tell Adam, the company was never yours to steal. Before he passed away, Richard made a revision to his will. He gave Emma the reins of power. Adam says, trembling, "Impossible. She was not born at all." I show him the will's date. Adam, he was aware. Almost everything, including the fraud, the affairs, and the agreements with Grant Technologies. You've been playing the exact game he anticipated the entire time. In the distance, police sirens blare. Adam's expression changes to one of rage. You believe you've triumphed? The board, the proof, and your signed confession are still with me. Check your phone, Sam murmurs. The one you just dropped, the real one. Evelyn's father pulling all support, Marcus Grant cutting agreements to save himself, the SEC renewing their investigation, and Dr. Collins sent one last message. I kept my promise, Richard. Adam's eyes widened as the messages poured in. The heritage of your granddaughter is secure. Adam collapses, his empire of lies crumbling around him, as the police storm in. However, I'm already leaving while seeing Emma sleeping soundly at home. Some victories are about defending what's most important, not about winning. The turmoil from last night can still be heard in the Harrison Industries boardroom. The doorway is crossed by police tape, and the conference table where Adam's empire eventually fell apart is covered in evidence markers. Richard Harrison's personal files are in the leather portfolio that Dr. Collins hands me. He murmurs softly, when the time was right, he wanted you to have these. I discover a note inside, buried beneath years' worth of financial documents and business plans. Richard's decisive handwriting is still visible despite the paper's age and the ink's fading. My beloved McKenna, you'll know by now why I picked you to guard Emma's inheritance, not because you're Adam's wife, but because you saw what he couldn't. Stock prices and merger agreements don't measure legacy. It is ingrained in choices, in choosing to defend instead of destroy. Emma is fussy in her job. I reposition her blanket and notice my image in the shadowed windows. Somehow I appear different, stronger, perhaps, or simply more certain. Sam shows up at the door. The SEC wants to take another look at the video testimony. Evelyn Grant is also present. When Evelyn walks in, I anticipate fury, but all I see in her eyes is tiredness. According to her, the board approved the dissolution of the merger attempt. Daddy is resigning? She twists her now ringless fingers and rambles. The scandal. I tell her, I never wanted this. Most of it is true. Neither did I. Her expression softens as she turns to face Emma. He also promised me children, you know. A future in which I genuinely had faith. I respond, I know, since I did the same once. The doctor clears his throat. The new members of the board are ready. They will require guidance about the company's future. Richard's letter about choices and legacies comes to mind. Inform them that we are reorganizing, beginning with the charitable foundation. Funding for programs that assist single parents should be doubled. From where she sits at the computer, already working on the press release, Tara smiles. Our attention is drawn to a disturbance outside. I watch through the glass walls as federal officers carry Adam away, his flawless suit rumpled and his confidence mask finally shattered. He looks at me and begins to say something, but I look away. There are some discussions that are not worthwhile. Dr. Collins pulls out another envelope and says, there's something else. Regarding Emma's trust, your father-in-law left detailed instructions. It's a challenge, not simply money. Projects for community investment must equal every dollar. Finally comprehending, I chuckle. He ensured that the legacy would not be taken. It must be earned. Speaking of income, Sam adds, corporate corruption and the price of truth, an investigative piece that recently went live, although I believe karma in the boardroom, sounded more appealing. I decide, no more karma, as I watch Emma fall asleep. No more retaliation either. Just moving forward. Dr. Collins' eyebrow goes up. And Adam? After closing Richard's portfolio, I said, we face justice through proper channels. I've had enough of his games. Evelyn gets up to go, but stops at the door. She nods to Emma and says, for what it's worth, I think Richard chose well, not just for the company, but for her. When she leaves, I stroll over to Richard's former workplace. His nameplate, which will shortly read Harrison Industries Trust Management, is still displayed on the door. His presence permeates every thoughtfully selected detail inside. One final message, dated the day of his death, is slipped inside his desk calendar. Remember, knowing when to stop is more powerful than knowing when to fight. Fortunately, none of her father's calculations are used when Emma wakes up and demands attention. I pick her up and inhale that wonderful infant smell. Are you prepared to return home? From the doorway, Sam asks. As I grab our belongings, I correct him, not home. Going forward. Reporters wait outside with inquiries concerning scandal and atonement. Lawyers, reorganization plans, and countless decisions regarding Emma's future await us tomorrow. But now, in this silent triumph, I realize what Richard has known all along. Sometimes the best form of retaliation isn't demolishing what other people have created, but rather creating something better out of the ashes they left behind.